One summer afternoon in the small town of Arlington, Indiana, seemed as peaceful as any other day. In a place with only a few hundred residents, everyone knew each other. Everyone trusted each other. But that very peace concealed a terrible secret. On June 7, 2023, 17-year-old Valerie Tyndall left home for work. She said she would be back for dinner. But as night fell, Valerie didn't return. Her phone went silent. And in the small house, fear began to creep in. The last person to see Valerie was her neighbor across the street, a 59-year-old man who used to hire her to mow the lawn. He said she might have run away. But the words came too quickly. Too certainly. Months passed. Seasons passed. Then, one late autumn day, the police and FBI returned to his property. Amidst a strange pile of rubbish, they unearthed a wooden box. Inside was the body of a young girl. Her nails were painted bright orange, the exact color Valerie posted on Facebook before she disappeared. It wasn't just the death of a girl, but a chilling warning: sometimes evil isn't in the shadows. It stands right at your doorstep. Valerie Tyndall was born on August 29, 2005, in Indianapolis, Indiana, USA, into a large family. She had one brother and 3 older sisters. When Valerie was young, she experienced an unpleasant event, though the details were kept private by her family. Following that incident, her mother decided the family should move somewhere safer, a decision everyone supported. They moved to Arlington, a small town less than an hour's drive from Indianapolis. With a population of about 300, Valerie's parents hoped it would be a peaceful environment to raise their children, far from the hustle and bustle of the big city. Thanks to their friendly and positive personalities, the whole family quickly integrated into the local community. Life remained calm and stable until the summer of 2023. Valerie, then 17, was preparing for her final year of high school. She was full of expectations for this school year, hoping to graduate soon and begin her adult life. Besides her studies, she loves animals, enjoys taking care of children, and has dreamed of becoming a veterinarian since elementary school. She has always strived to achieve that goal. As a senior, Valerie worked multiple jobs to save money for college, as she didn't want to be a burden on her family. Normally, she took Wednesdays off to meet friends. But that day was different. Even though it was Wednesday, she told her mother she was going to work. By June 7, 2023, during summer break, Valerie was focused on working and saving money for college rather than relaxing. She held several jobs and typically took Wednesdays off to spend time with friends. However, on this particular Wednesday, June 7, 2023, she told her mother she was going to work. That day, Valerie planned to visit her neighbor, Patrick Scott, 59, who lived across the street. She often helped him tend his large lawn, and he paid her. He had a gardening business and sometimes hired her when he had a lot of work. They often referred to each other as friends, though Valerie's family suspected Patrick might have a different interest in her. Her mother grew uneasy when Valerie said she would spend the whole day working for him. Although Valerie's family had known Patrick for years and considered him polite and friendly, especially since Valerie was also friends with his granddaughter, her mother couldn't shake her concern. Patrick assured her that everything was appropriate, and his calm manner eased her doubts. Over time, the two families maintained a good relationship, and Valerie continued working for him regularly. By the summer of 2023, Valerie had been helping Patrick for about 2 years. Her mother believed he truly supported Valerie's ambitions and saw his jobs as an opportunity for her daughter to earn money for college and build experience for the future. Valerie played an important role in convincing her mother because Patrick paid her well and offered her steady work. However, there were reasons to doubt Patrick's character. According to her mother, he had staged dramatic scenes several times, and sometimes acted like a jealous boyfriend toward Valerie. Despite being much older, he often made insulting remarks about the boys she spent time with, which seemed inappropriate. After working together for a while, Valerie gradually became more comfortable with Patrick's strange behavior and simply attributed it to his eccentricity. Her family also felt reassured, as Patrick had a good reputation and was respected in the community. On June 7, 2023, Valerie planned to spend most of the day mowing lawns for Patrick's clients. She promised to be home in time for dinner, but when night fell, she still hadn't returned. Concerned, her mother tried calling her, but the phone remained unanswered. When Valerie's mother asked Patrick about her, he said that she hadn't worked with him that day and that they had no plans to go anywhere together. Her mother was stunned. She couldn't understand why Valerie would lie. She tried to calm herself by assuming that Valerie had gone out with friends or perhaps was seeing a new boyfriend she hadn't mentioned. Still, she planned to question Valerie once she returned. Since her daughter was normally open and self-reliant, that evening, Patrick and his wife, Linda, went to Valerie's house. Instead of offering comfort, Patrick suggested that Valerie had probably run away. He presented his theory confidently, but after a while, Valerie's mother began to sense something was wrong. Patrick seemed to grasp the situation too quickly. While Valerie hadn't been missing long enough to draw such a conclusion, there was no reason to believe Valerie had run away. She had never done so before, and she had no mental health issues or addictions. This disappearance was completely out of character. The more she thought about it, the more suspicious her mother became. She sensed Patrick was trying to manipulate her thoughts and steer the story in his favor. She started to wonder if he had something to do with Valerie's disappearance, which might explain why he was trying to influence her so strongly. Still, she decided to wait before contacting the police, hoping Valerie would return on her own. That night, she remained convinced her daughter was simply out with friends and would come home soon. But when the family woke up on the morning of June 8, 2023, and Valerie's room was still empty, her mother panicked. Since she still couldn't reach Valerie, she called the police. Valerie Tyndall was officially reported missing, and an Amber Alert was issued. According to the family, Valerie was last seen around noon on June 7. Her mother shared her growing suspicions with investigators, who agreed that Valerie might be in danger. Police distributed her description, photo, and details of her car, including its make, model, and license plate number. They began a serious search and quickly questioned Patrick, not only because of his ambiguous relationship with Valerie, but also because she disappeared while on her way to work for him. Patrick had already been screened and had no criminal record, especially not for violent behavior. When first questioned by police, he appeared nervous and claimed he hadn't seen Valerie on June 7, saying their last meeting was on June 6. At first, his story seemed believable, but the police already had statements from other witnesses that contradicted him. Several witnesses reported seeing Patrick and Valerie together on June 7, the day she went missing. Some even multiple times. One woman said she saw Patrick driving Valerie's car. This immediately raised suspicion. When Patrick learned the police had this information, he changed his story. Now admitting that he had seen Valerie on the morning of June 7, he said he had driven Valerie's car to take her to a nearby town about 10 minutes from Arlington, dropped her off, and never saw her again. During the following days, as the police continued to question him, Patrick's story kept changing slightly. His final version during interrogation was that on June 7, he and Valerie met at a store in Shelbyville. He used his company car, and Valerie asked to be dropped off in a neighboring town. Patrick said that when she got out, she walked toward a light blue pickup truck driven by an unknown man, and he never saw her after that. However, shortly afterward, Patrick changed his statement again. He said that he hadn't dropped Valerie off anywhere, but had only driven her around town before returning home. A neighbor asked him to house sit while they went to work, so he left Valerie there. When he returned, she was gone. He assumed she had gone home. But when her mother came looking for her daughter, he realized something was amiss. Patrick insisted that he didn't know where Valerie was. However, investigators quickly determined that his story wasn't entirely true. He had at least admitted that Valerie had been at his house, which was the last confirmed location. Police also suspected he lied about being at work all day, which deepened their suspicions. To investigate further, police asked Patrick to hand over his phone. He handed it over willingly. Phone data revealed that he hadn't gone to work at all but had spent almost the entire day of June 7 on his property. The message records between him and Valerie were also revealing. Valerie had sent Patrick a single message on June 7 at 11:23 a.m., saying she would be joining him soon. Patrick sent her 2 messages afterward, one at 5:40 p.m. on June 7 and another at 2:46 p.m. on June 8, asking where she was. This evidence showed that Patrick had been lying from the beginning. He clearly knew about their planned meeting, and his attempts to contact her later appeared to be an act. Investigators also learned that Valerie's mother had given Patrick full access to her daughter's location data through the AppLife 360 app in 2021. When Valerie started working for him, this meant Patrick could see Valerie's location in real time and didn't need to ask her where she was. It seemed he was deliberately trying to distance himself from her disappearance and build a false alibi. Despite their suspicions, the police did not have enough evidence to arrest Patrick. His constantly changing statements and attempts to mislead investigators, however, made him the main suspect. Investigators wanted to search his home, but needed a search warrant to do so. They decided to charge him with giving multiple false statements that had obstructed the investigation. While this was not enough for an arrest, it provided grounds for a search. Surprisingly, the thorough search of Patrick's house revealed nothing. The search for Valerie continued for months. It became increasingly clear that Valerie was unlikely to be found alive. She had been completely inactive on social media, had made no financial transactions, and had not used her phone. At one point, the investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. After that, on October 11, 2023, the investigators decided to carefully examine Patrick Scott's property. This time, they brought along specially trained sniffer dogs, believing Patrick was connected to the disappearance. Remarkably, all 4 dogs instantly picked up the scent of a corpse and ran in the same direction, toward a small pond on the property. The officers called in a diving team, but no body was found. Still, the dogs continued reacting to the water. Handlers explained that this response was expected, as dogs can detect even trace amounts of scent that might have been carried by the wind and absorbed by the water. Although Valerie's body wasn't found, the dog's behavior strengthened suspicions that she had been on Patrick's property. As a result, investigators ordered an aerial topographical survey for the next day. This survey aimed to detect recently disturbed soil, which could indicate a burial site. Several areas on the property showed signs of soil disruption, but none led to concrete results. The investigation once again stalled for several weeks. Valerie remained officially missing, as there was still no definitive proof of her death. 7 weeks after the aerial survey, the case took a new turn. On November 28, 2023, investigators decided to inspect Patrick's property one more time. This time, both local law enforcement and FBI agents were involved. During the aerial review, they noticed a strange pile of garbage in an area far from the house, an unusual place to dump household waste. Investigators suspected the pile could be concealing something. Using specialized equipment, they detected shallow cavities under the mound. When the site was excavated, a wooden box emitting a strong odor was uncovered. Inside, they found the body of a girl wrapped in black plastic. Due to decomposition, her identity was initially uncertain, but investigators noticed her bright orange nail polish, matching the color Valerie had posted about on social media the day before she disappeared. The body was later confirmed to be Valerie Tyndall. Patrick Scott, 59, was arrested and charged with her kidnapping and murder. After his arrest, Patrick resisted but was eventually subdued. During interrogation, he confessed. He said he had met Valerie on June 7 at an apartment complex in Shelbyville, having lured her there with a promise of lunch at a restaurant in Indianapolis. Around 1:00 p.m., he brought her to his home. Less than 30 minutes earlier, her phone had gone inactive. Patrick admitted to abusing Valerie and using his belt in the attack, a belt he reportedly continued to wear until his arrest. Afterward, he returned home and tried to delete app data and digital activity from his phone. However, he overlooked the Apple Health app, which retained crucial movement and time records that later supported the investigation. Patrick claimed that Valerie tried to blackmail him into buying her a new car, threatening to tell everyone that he had seduced her if he refused. This led to an argument that escalated into a fight, during which Patrick attacked her in a moment of rage. He insisted the killing was not intentional and blamed it on losing control. The incident took place in Patrick's bedroom. Upon realizing he had killed Valerie, Patrick took her body to the home office, a place other family members never visited. The body remained there for nearly a day, wrapped only in plastic wrap. On June 8, Patrick bought boards from a hardware store to build a makeshift box to bury the body. He stated that there was already a hole on his property, and he planned to fill it with cement. The size of the hole was perfect for Valerie's grave. When questioned, he could not explain how the hole had appeared, raising suspicions that the killing was premeditated and the hole had been dug in advance. Patrick later claimed he had planned to use it to dispose of old video cassettes. Investigators doubted this explanation. Why would anyone bury tapes instead of simply throwing them away? A new police report later revealed more about the case. It stated that Patrick invited Valerie to his home intending to seduce her. When she refused, he became enraged, killed her, and then buried her in the homemade wooden box. Investigators also determined what happened to Valerie's car. Witnesses saw Patrick driving it on June 7. To hide his involvement, he drove the car to a nearby suburb, removed the license plates, abandoned it near a housing development, and threw the keys into a river. The car was eventually found, but the keys were not, and Patrick later claimed he couldn't remember where he had thrown them. In early 2024, Patrick began denying any relationship with Valerie beyond friendship and work. But the evidence contradicted him. They had spent a lot of time together, shopping, eating in cafes, and even visiting a water park. As shown by photographs, Valerie's mother remembered her daughter asking for permission for that trip, believing Patrick was there with his family. Patrick's wife had also noticed his growing interest in Valerie but assumed it stemmed from his fondness for children and Valerie's friendship with their granddaughter. Nobody imagined that this seemingly kind man had inappropriate feelings for a 17-year-old girl. However, the investigation proved that Patrick had feelings for Valerie. What bothered the police most was his indifference, completely cold when talking about his crime and the young girl he had murdered. However, some people blamed Valerie's parents, arguing that her mother had ignored warning signs and trusted Patrick too much. Until the case was solved, no one realized how deceitful he truly was. Valerie's mother believed her daughter only worked for him. He was seen as a close family friend. Valerie had worked for Patrick for over 2 years, during which he gained her and her family's complete trust. She was also close to his granddaughter, which gave him further access to her. At a recent press conference, Valerie's family spoke about the trauma they endured and how Patrick's behavior changed once the search for Valerie began. He became withdrawn, avoiding her family and displaying hostility towards them. Whenever her mother tried to speak to him during the 5-month investigation, he would quickly flee into the house. During the investigation, it was discovered that a few weeks after Valerie's disappearance, witnesses saw Patrick burning various items in his backyard. He had built a large fire and had even torn down a shed to get wood for fuel. This behavior seemed suspicious, and investigators suspected he was destroying additional evidence. Patrick refused to comment on the matter. On December 14, a funeral service for 17-year-old Valerie was held at the Christian church in Arlington. Nearly the entire congregation attended. The entire community still couldn't believe that in their close-knit neighborhood, there could be such a cruel person capable of taking the life of a young girl. Patrick's trial for kidnapping and murder was scheduled for April 2024. Because he confessed to his crime, the trial was conducted under a simplified procedure, sparing Valerie's family from having to endure further pain by reliving the entire incident. Patrick maintained his confession, yet it was believed he might not fully grasp the severity of his crime. He went on to claim that Valerie had tried to blackmail him into buying her a new car. Ultimately, Patrick Scott accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. Under the agreement, he was sentenced to 57 years in prison. Valerie Tyndall's family was satisfied with the sentence. As given Patrick's age, he will likely spend the rest of his life in jail. he was still grieving. He preserves her room exactly as it was, seals it off, and keeps it dust-free and untouched. Investigators noted it. The farmhouse decayed, but Augusta's bedroom stayed untouched, a shrine, a line between past and present. After her death came not just grief but collapse. Psychiatrists later said Ed lost his only emotional anchor. Her rules didn't fade. In isolation, they grew louder and twisted. From then on, Ed Gein became increasingly nocturnal. He visited graveyards. He collected. He read anatomy texts and pulp magazines. The case file says no one intervened. No one connected the signs. A question haunts every later discovery. When the authority that shaped his reality disappeared, what filled the silence? Something did. It didn't come from outside Plainfield. Bernice Worden's disappearance begins not as a mystery but as a workplace anomaly. She opens the store and never closes it. By early afternoon on November 16, 1957, customers sense something is wrong. The lights are on, the door is unlocked, and no clerk stands behind the counter. Police reports note blood near the cash register, not enough to explain what happened, but enough to raise alarm. Before sunset, her son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, arrives. He knows procedure and his mother's habits. She wouldn't leave town without notice or abandon her store. Within hours, he reports her missing. Tension spreads. This isn't a runaway or a misunderstanding. The blood changes everything. Investigators secure the scene and piece together her final hours, checking receipts, interviewing witnesses. One name keeps coming up: Ed Gein. The antifreeze receipt is real-time stamped and written in Ed's hand. Multiple witnesses confirm seeing him in the store that morning. According to the investigation file, there is no record of any other customer around that time. Ed does not flee. He does not hide. When deputies arrive at his farmhouse that evening, he is not home. They locate him later at a nearby grocery store, casually shopping. He is cooperative, calm. He offers no resistance when arrested. He asks no questions. That calm becomes part of the case record. Inside the hardware store, police note the absence of a struggle beyond the blood near the counter. No weapon is found, no signs of robbery. The cash drawer is open, but money remains. This was not theft. It was targeted. In Plainfield, concern gives way to something colder: fear without a name. In later interviews, neighbors revisit old moments, odd remarks, uneasy silences. Nothing concrete, only hindsight sharpening what once seemed trivial. As deputies ready a search warrant for Gein's farmhouse, the house sits on a neglected lot, windows dark, paint peeling. Officers recall the smell hitting first as they approach: stale, organic, impossible to place. They enter looking for Bernice Worden, and when the first flashlight beam cuts through the dark, the case stops being one missing woman and becomes something older and far more disturbing. The search begins methodically. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Floors are cluttered with debris. Newspapers are stacked in uneven piles. The farmhouse is cold, unheated. According to officer reports, silence dominates the interior, broken only by footsteps and breath. Then a deputy opens the door to a shed attached to the house. Hanging upside down from the rafters is the body of Bernice Worden. She has been dressed out and positioned like a hunted animal. The method mirrors techniques used in deer processing. Officers recognize it immediately. Several step back. One leaves the building to vomit. Radios crackle. Backup is called. The search expands. What began as a homicide scene becomes something else entirely. Inside the house, officers document objects they cannot yet categorize. Bowls made from human skulls, a lampshade fashioned from skin, masks, furniture upholstered with human remains. According to the investigation file, many items are later confirmed through forensic testing to be human in origin. Importantly, the evidence is not random. It is organized, stored, preserved. Some pieces are cleaned, some are labeled. This is not the work of a moment. It is accumulation over years. Despite the visual impact, investigators move carefully. They photograph everything, bag items, and secure the property. The farmhouse becomes a crime scene of national significance before the night ends. Ed Gein is brought in for questioning shortly afterward. He does not deny involvement. He does not express panic. According to interrogation transcripts, his tone is flat and cooperative. He answers questions directly. often without elaboration. He says he robbed graves, that the items came from dead women, and that he didn't kill most of them. He adds, Bernice Worden was different. She was alive when he took her. He says it flatly. In the interrogation room, the prevailing reaction isn't anger but disbelief. Investigators are trained for violence, not for its ritualized aftermath. As forensic teams comb the farmhouse, another truth emerges. There are more objects than bodies. Some remains are partial, others can't be identified. The timeline stretches back possibly decades. The focus shifts from what happened to Bernice Worden to a darker question. How long had Ed Gein been doing this unnoticed, unchallenged, living in plain sight? And if the whole town misses out on that, who else? As daylight reaches the farmhouse, the work becomes slower, more precise. Forensic teams catalog what can be measured, what can be tested, what can be proven. A confirmed fact emerges through autopsy reports and cemetery records. Most of the human remains found on Ed Gein's property did not come from murder. They came from graves. According to the investigation file, Gein targeted freshly buried bodies, middle-aged women, recently deceased, often those who resembled his mother in age or build. He waited until funerals passed, until the ground was quiet. Then he dug. Grave robbing takes patience, timing, and knowledge of burial routines. This was no impulse, it was quiet, deliberate planning. Forensics confirm the skulls, skin, and bones came from multiple people. Some can be traced to local cemeteries, others remain unidentified. Investigators cross-check missing person reports, hospital death records, and burial logs as the pattern comes into focus. Ed describes his actions without visible distress. Psychiatrists later note that he separates the act from its consequences. He says he wanted to make a woman's suit to feel close to his mother, not to harm or frighten anyone, and insists the dead did not mind. This is not a justification. It is a record. Investigators then face a classification problem. Many acts are clearly criminal, but few fit neatly into homicide statutes. Grave desecration, abuse of corpses, theft. The evidence carries a weight the era's legal language cannot match. Then another fact sharpens the case. Bernice Worden was not the first woman Ed killed. Mary Hogan, a tavern owner, disappeared in 1954. Her case had gone cold. No body was recovered. According to Ed Gein's later statements, he killed her during a visit to her bar. Her remains are never fully found, but partial evidence recovered from the farmhouse supports his confession. This was not a single break. It was a pattern interrupted by chance. Investigators now understand that the farmhouse is not merely a crime scene. It is an archive, each object a record of escalation, each act a rehearsal. The central question no longer focuses on what Ed did. It focuses on how the system had no mechanism to see him coming, because the deeper the investigation goes, the clearer it becomes. Ed Gein did not hide. He simply was not seen. The interrogation room is plain. A table, 2 chairs. No raised voices, no pressure tactics. According to official transcripts, Ed talks freely. is how the law will respond to a man who admits everything and understands almost nothing. The courtroom never fills with spectators expecting testimony. There is no opening statement, no cross-examination, no jury seated to weigh evidence. The Ed Gein case moves forward without the architecture of a traditional trial. For the Worden family, there is no verdict to mark an end. For the town of Plainfield, there is no public reckoning. The case resolves on paper, not in open court. Psychiatric evaluations continue for years. Doctors document delusions tied to identity confusion and maternal fixation. According to medical reports, Ed believed that women's bodies could be used, possessed, and modified to provide security. He is not found to be malingering. Multiple independent assessments reach the same conclusion. In 1968, a decade after his arrest, Ed is deemed competent to stand trial. By then, the case has aged, evidence has been stored, witnesses have moved on or died. Nonetheless, the legal process resumes. He pleads not guilty by reason of insanity. The trial is brief, clinical. The facts are not disputed. The defense does not attempt to reinterpret evidence. The prosecution does not seek spectacle. The jury deliberates for less than an hour. Ed Gein is found not guilty by reason of insanity for the murder of Bernice Worden. He is returned to state custody, this time to the Mendota Mental Health Institute. He remains institutionalized for the rest of his life. No parole hearings, no appeals that alter the outcome. The feeling left behind is not closure, it is suspension. Justice, in its conventional form, never arrives. Accountability is acknowledged, but punishment is redirected into containment. The farmhouse is burned years later, reportedly by an arsonist. Whether the act was intentional or symbolic is not officially confirmed. The physical center of the case disappears. What remains are records, photographs, transcripts, and a growing public fascination that begins to distort the facts. Because, as the legal process ends quietly, something louder begins elsewhere. Ed Gein dies on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77. He has spent most of his adult life in state custody. According to medical records, his final years are marked by physical decline, not psychological change. There are no final confessions, no revelations withheld for decades. The facts of the case remain as they were when first documented. This is the final verified outcome. Almost immediately after Ed's arrest, the story begins to detach from the evidence. Journalists arrive. Books are written, details are exaggerated, crimes are added without proof. The number of victims grows in retellings, despite no forensic confirmation. The distinction between murder and grave robbery blurs in public memory. This distortion becomes one of the case's most enduring consequences. Ed's actions inspire fictional characters in films and novels. His name is rarely spoken in those adaptations, but the imagery remains: masks, skin, rural isolation. These representations amplify horror while stripping context. The real victims, Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, become footnotes in cultural shorthand. The fact remains: Ed Gein killed 2 women. He desecrated the dead. He was legally insane. These truths are sufficient. They do not require inflation. The case does, however, change investigative practice. Law enforcement begins to take behavioral warning signs more seriously. Psychiatric profiling advances. The importance of forensic verification over rumor becomes clearer, though not always followed. For Plainfield, the legacy is quieter. According to later interviews, residents resist the town's association with the case. They remember Worden as a mother, Hogan as a business owner. They remember Ed as a man who was present, visible, and still profoundly misunderstood. The lingering feeling isn't just fear, but unease with how close it was. The realization that extreme deviance didn't come from outside, it lived nearby, spoke politely, and waited. What happens when isolation is mistaken for harmlessness? When oddness is excused because it is familiar? When no one looks closely because nothing has yet demanded attention? The Ed Gein case does not end with his death. It continues as a cautionary record, one that warns against myth-making and reminds us that truth, when carefully documented, is already unsettling enough. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Krista Waninger. On May 2, 1963, a tragic event occurred on Via Emilia in Rome when police were called to an apartment building after witnesses reported finding an injured girl. Two police officers arrived at the apartment building and went up to the fourth floor. In the hallway between apartments 14 and 15, they discovered a blonde woman in a blue coat lying unconscious in a large pool of blood, her eyes wide with horror. Several people had gathered around her, including a shocked janitor and a young neighbor who worked at a medical center. The neighbor checked the victim's pulse, performed CPR, and did everything she could to keep the girl alive until an ambulance arrived. One of the neighbors called an ambulance, but by the time it arrived, it was too late. The girl was dead. The victim was identified as Krista Waninger, 23. She had come to Rome in search of success and fame, but tragically, she had been fatally stabbed 7 times. The police immediately began questioning neighbors and witnesses to piece together what had happened. However, no one had witnessed the attack, not even the residents of apartments 14 and 15. The police knocked on the doors of both apartments, and Gerda Hodap came out. When asked by the police about Krista, she stated that they were friends. They had planned to meet, but Krista was attacked and stabbed just steps away from Gerda's apartment. The attack occurred at 2:50 p.m., and Gerda claimed that she had been taking a nap and had not heard anything unusual. While Krista was brutally murdered behind closed doors, it caused quite a commotion on their floor. Her explanation seemed implausible. The doorman informed the police that Krista did not live in the building. They knew each other because the victim frequently visited Gerda's apartment. The murder had occurred nearby. After investigating a few blocks away, the police went to Krista's house, which appeared to be quite empty. Meanwhile, Gerda was taken to the police station for questioning while the authorities carefully examined the crime scene. Under the doorknob of Gerda's apartment, the police discovered a bloody handprint, indicating that Krista had tried to call for help. The building's doorman recalled that when he heard a woman scream, he quickly ran up the stairs. On his way, he encountered a strange man coming down who seemed startled to see him. At first, the doorman did not pay much attention to the strange man. However, he later suspected that there was a connection between this man and the case. When the doorman arrived at the scene, several residents from nearby apartments had gathered. They found Krista lying in a large pool of blood, her breathing irregular and her condition deteriorating. The witnesses were all in a state of panic and did not know how to help. Gerda, who was present at the police station, was willing to share any information she had about her friend Krista. She seemed genuinely concerned about the attack and did not understand why anyone would want to harm Krista. They had been friends for a long time, supporting each other in their modeling and acting careers. Gerda said that Krista was supposed to arrive at around 3 p.m., but she had been feeling unwell that day and had taken sleeping pills, which caused her to miss the attack. Although Gerda spoke about her sleep problems, she could not remember the name of the pills she had taken or explain why she had not canceled her meeting with Krista despite having gone to bed. The police found Gerda's story suspicious. Krista had suffered serious injuries, including 7 stab wounds, 3 of which were in the chest. The attacker had used a large knife to assault Krista, leaving her unable to be saved. In addition, Krista had several defensive wounds on her arms. The forensic expert observed that all of the wounds appeared to have been inflicted from above, indicating that the attacker was tall. In interviews with witnesses, it was confirmed that a man, described as unknown, had fled the scene shortly before the police arrived. Several people, including the concierge, reported seeing a tall man in a blue jacket leaving the building shortly after the attack. Using the descriptions of the witnesses, a composite sketch was created and subsequently published in newspapers and broadcast on television. The police reconstructed the timeline of events, determining that Krista left her apartment at approximately 2 p.m. and planned to return at 5 p.m. Before the appointment, she had visited a friend. About 30 minutes later, she arrived at Gerda's house, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and was attacked on the stairs. It is believed that the attacker knew Krista and was waiting for her. Police initially suspected her friend Gerda because of her strange behavior during the attack. A neighbor reported that she had called Gerda's apartment and heard someone moving around behind the door, but no one answered, perhaps out of fear. The police suspected that Gerda was withholding information. Gerda insisted that no one rang the doorbell until the police arrived and claimed that she had heard nothing until the police knocked. Krista's murder in broad daylight in central Rome caused a media frenzy. The police hoped to gather useful information from the public, but the widespread attention also led to rumors spreading rapidly. The police received dozens of statements, most of which were complex, while others simply restated what was already known. They investigated all known criminals with a history of knife attacks, focusing not only on those who might be hiding in Rome, but also checking neighboring cities, although this effort was fruitless. In the midst of these events, a wave of panic spread throughout the community. People became increasingly afraid to go out, and the police station was flooded with angry calls from locals urging them to arrest the person responsible for Krista's attack. Some callers even made threats to the police, demanding action to ensure the safety of the streets. Meanwhile, Gerda maintained her innocence, calling the police's suspicion of her an insult. The police began to explore other leads, focusing especially on those close to Krista. There were many indications that the perpetrator was connected to Krista, leading the police to believe that the attack may have been motivated by jealousy or personal animosity. Therefore, they looked into the relationships Krista had formed since moving to another country. One notable individual was Krista's boyfriend. He was very jealous and possessive, with evidence suggesting that he had abused Krista on several occasions. Their relationship was tumultuous, often triggered by his unfounded suspicions that Krista was cheating on him with other men. This jealousy may have stemmed from several factors, including Krista's notebook filled with the phone numbers of men in the modeling and acting industries. Her profession required her to socialize and network with many people, and Krista frequently attended social events to promote herself and build valuable relationships, which made her boyfriend feel uncomfortable. He became jealous of every random person she interacted with, and his insecurities led him to become increasingly controlling. Every phone call from a man was viewed as a betrayal, which angered her boyfriend. This pressure caused Krista to decline movie offers and made her financially dependent on him. The police identified two suspects: Krista's boyfriend, who had both a motive and a violent streak, and her friend Gerda Hodap, who was near the scene of the murder but claimed not to have seen or heard anything. It is possible that Gerda had a motive for the murder, perhaps wanting to eliminate an attractive rival. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. Journalists constantly intervened, probing for information and asking difficult questions. The police were puzzled by the presence of a strange man in a blue jacket. Although this man appeared at the crime scene and quickly left, he coldly mentioned that there was a woman screaming on the 4th floor, without offering any help. Other witnesses grew suspicious and tried to explain the presence of this stranger. The police concluded that the case might have been carefully planned, with the man in the blue jacket acting as a distraction. However, if that were the case, the criminal would have likely stayed at the crime scene, which raised suspicions about Gerda. Meanwhile, Gerda faced constant interrogations and became a media phenomenon. Journalists pursued her, spreading rumors and portraying her as a monster. The police believed that if Gerda was not involved in the murder, she may have acted as an informant or concealed information. However, to date, there has been no concrete evidence linking her to the case. The police continue to investigate the possibility of a random attack. However, they face a shortage of resources. A search of Krista's inner circle yielded no leads. Her address book contained many phone numbers related to men and various clubs in Rome, as well as organizations connected to modeling and acting. Hundreds of contacts had accumulated over the years. Despite a thorough police investigation, each contact led to a dead end. Gerda remained under close police surveillance. They even took her to the morgue to view Krista's body and observe her reaction. The police noted her emotionless response to their questions. The interrogations were repeated several times. Gerda changed her story, claiming that the doorbell rang when Krista visited. However, the screams that followed frightened her, so she did not open the door. Gerda explained her dishonesty by saying that she felt ashamed for not helping her friend. The police believed that she was a potential accomplice to the crime, suggesting that Krista had been lured there so that her attacker could kill her. Ultimately, the police were unable to obtain a confession that would identify Gerda as the killer, and at most, she could be considered an accomplice. By reconstructing the timeline of events, the police discovered why the janitor had not noticed a strange man entering the building. He had visited the utility room several times during the day. It was a complete coincidence that he had entered just before Krista arrived at the apartment complex. This raised suspicions that the attacker knew exactly when and where Krista would arrive. Several witnesses reported seeing Krista enter the apartment complex alone, unescorted, and without anyone else accompanying her. This led the police to believe that the perpetrator had entered the apartment complex before Krista, just before she arrived. It was suspected that the perpetrator knew which floor she would go to and where to wait for her. After a while, the Krista Waninger murder case yielded no more clues. Public interest in the case also waned, as no similar attacks occurred afterward. People began to calm down, and Krista's case gradually faded into oblivion, largely because her family lived far away in another country. Despite efforts to understand the situation, it was difficult to generate significant interest in the case. Krista's mother and sister actively distributed flyers with her picture in the hope of attracting potential witnesses, but their efforts did not advance the investigation. The investigation into Krista's murder had stalled for 10 months until an anonymous witness contacted a local newspaper. Using a false name, he asked to speak to the editor. The man claimed to be the brother of Krista's killer and offered to sell information to the newspaper for a large sum of money. The journalist who took the call felt that the man's story was more than just a scam to capitalize on the tragedy. Believing that the witness might have accurate information, he decided to contact the police. The journalist carefully communicated with the man, promising to collect the necessary funds to pay him in advance by the evening. They agreed to contact him later to discuss the details. After the call, the journalist went to the police station to report the unusual conversation. The police showed interest in the case, and the journalist agreed to work with them, using special equipment to monitor the incoming call. The anonymous caller contacted the journalist at 19:05. During this call, 2 police officers listened in and recorded the conversation. They were able to locate the source of the call. Several police officers then went to the address provided, where they found a 32-year-old man using the phone booth. His name was Guido Pieri. When they saw him, the police immediately recognized that he matched the police sketch of the suspect. He was arrested and searched, and their suspicions were confirmed when they found a 30-centimeter-long knife in his jacket pocket, similar to the weapon used in the attack on Krista. The police believed they had the right suspect. Unfortunately, further examination revealed that Krista was not killed with this knife. Guido Pieri insisted from the beginning that he was only trying to profit from the story, but he was unable to provide any clear information. When the police searched his home, they found another knife, but no blood, and it could not be linked to Krista's wounds. Disturbing notes were found in Guido's home, including 5 notebooks detailing gruesome murders of women. The most alarming was the final story, which was very similar to the case of Krista Waninger. The story included specific details that had not been made public and were known only to the perpetrator, raising suspicions against Guido. Guido Pieri grew up in a family with 4 brothers and 3 sisters. From an early age, he had a strong passion for adventure painting. However, while in vocational school, he decided to drop out and start working, especially after struggling to finish 8th grade 3 times. Although he was not unintelligent, he had obvious problems with self-control. By the age of 18, he was employed as a mechanic in a construction company, maintaining a fleet of equipment. After 10 years, Guido married a much older woman. During this time, he pursued his passion for painting, dreaming of becoming an artist. In February, Guido moved to Paris to pursue this dream, but unfortunately, his efforts ended in disappointment. In his diary, he explained his feelings in detail. It was clear that Guido was a deeply creative individual with a unique perspective on life, but he struggled to manage the challenges he faced and find his own path. He lacked the courage and motivation needed to overcome these obstacles. As a result, Guido moved back to Rome, ended his marriage, and took a job as a secretary at the Institute, where he worked until he was 63. His diaries reveal a disillusioned man full of ambitions and ideas that he was unable to turn into reality. When the police questioned him about the notes they discovered during the search, Guido explained that they were ideas for a future novel, as he longed to write a book. When reviewing the notes, the police noticed many similarities to the real-life case of Christa Waninger. Details of the crime scene and descriptions of the people involved closely resembled the apartment building and surrounding area where Christa was murdered. This raised questions about whether these accounts referred to her murder, which aroused suspicions among the police. Guido led a seemingly normal life, frequenting upscale restaurants and bars. However, he remained on the police radar, having been spotted at several other violent crime scenes unrelated to Christa. Unfortunately, he did not confess or provide any evidence of his innocence. At that time, witnesses who had seen a suspicious man in a blue jacket leaving the apartment building after hearing Christa scream had not yet testified. 3 of the 4 witnesses identified him as Guido. Despite ongoing questioning and suspicion, no physical evidence was found linking him to the crime. The police decided to return all the confiscated diaries belonging to Guido, and he was released. During this time, Christa's sister pushed for the investigation to be reopened. The police reviewed all relevant information, but this lead did not yield any results. Guido remained the prime suspect, but he did not confess. Despite having no evidence to present, the police continued to investigate and put pressure on him. Surprisingly, Guido Pieri went to the police station and confessed to killing Christa Waninger. He was arrested, and it took a year before the trial began. Despite his confession, he was acquitted due to a lack of sufficient evidence. His lawyer argued that Guido had mental health problems and pointed out that he refused to confess again. By this time, he had been officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, which led the police to consider his confession unreliable. There were 2 more hearings. In both trials, Guido Pieri was found guilty, but he was released on bail due to his mental condition. Guido later changed his story, claiming that he had been at the scene of the murder by accident and denied any guilt. In addition, Guido destroyed his own notebooks, containing disturbing notes that could have been used against him. During the psychiatric evaluation, he was found to be insane. Therefore, the court could only order Guido to undergo treatment for schizophrenia. Despite his crime, he was allowed to go free without any apparent motive. For a long time, he was considered a threat to society, but there was not enough evidence to prove it. He was eventually released and deemed harmless, much to the shock of Christa's family. Sadly, Christa's relatives were never able to obtain justice or see Guido incarcerated. Love is often viewed as a beautiful and gentle emotion, connected to life's most cherished moments. But when love loses its balance, it can become incredibly dangerous. When control replaces concern, when jealousy overrides reason, emotions can turn into obsession, and in the darkest cases, into an unforgivable crime. The story of Maritza, Emilio, and their daughter Joandra is not just the tragedy of a broken family. It is a series of wrong choices spanning years, pain fueled by hatred, obsession. Above all, it serves as a terrifying warning that the past, if not let go of, can return to destroy the present. To understand why this tragedy happened, we need to go back in time to where it all began. In the late 1970s, Cuba was experiencing a period of severe socio-economic hardship. Daily life was marked by shortages, restrictions, and uncertainty. It was during this challenging period of history that Maritza and Emilio met. They immediately felt a mutual attraction. Emilio fell deeply in love with Maritza, believing she was the one he had been searching for. However, his family worried about their relationship. They were both very young and their future together seemed unstable. Like many young couples, their strong feelings for each other led them to move quickly. Without thinking things through carefully, their daughter, Joandra Núñez, was born on May 29, 1977. Afterward, motherhood became Maritza's main focus. She dedicated herself completely to their daughter. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming in the marriage. By 1978, barely a year after the wedding, Maritza began confiding in her parents about serious problems in her relationship. The household was tense, arguments were frequent, and the situation deteriorated further after Joandra's birth. Emilio loved his daughter deeply, but his idea of fatherhood was rigid, controlling. He distrusted Maritza's ability to raise their child and became increasingly possessive. Maritza, in turn, grew alarmed by his jealousy, aggressive behavior. Emilio, however, blamed their struggles not on himself, but on the oppressive political, social, and economic environment in Cuba. Eventually, Emilio began talking about escaping the country. He confided in a friend he trusted. That trust was misplaced. The friend reported him to the authorities. Emilio was arrested and classified as a political prisoner. He faced a sentence of up to 20 years in a Cuban prison for attempting to flee the country. Despite everything, Maritza and Emilio did not immediately separate. There were still feelings between them. But prison walls created an insurmountable distance. Emilio was cut off from his wife and from his daughter's life. During his incarceration, he was subjected to psychiatric treatment, including electroshock therapy, procedures he later described as degrading, traumatic. By 1980, Joandra was nearly 3 years old, and Cuba was on the brink of massive change. That year marked the beginning of the Mariel boat lift, a mass exodus in which more than 125,000 Cubans fled to the United States, most heading to Florida. For many, it represented escape, survival, and the promise of a new life. Maritza was among those who left. She managed to reach Miami, but was forced to leave Joandra behind in Cuba, under the care of her grandmother. Determined to reunite her family, Maritza worked tirelessly, saving money and navigating the complex immigration system, hoping one day to bring her daughter and mother to the United States legally. For nearly 9 years, Maritza rebuilt her life in America. In 1989, she remarried. Her new husband, Armando Martin, provided stability and support. Together, they had a son. The marriage also made it possible for Maritza to finally bring her loved ones, most importantly, Joandra, to the United States. For the first time in years, mother and daughter were reunited. Life seemed to be moving in a hopeful direction. That same year marked a turning point for Emilio as well. As part of broader political changes, he was released, granted the opportunity to seek asylum in the United States. He dreamed of starting his life over, But by then, Maritza had built a new life, and Emilio struggled to re-establish contact with her or with Joandra. Before leaving Cuba, Emilio remarried, began rebuilding his life. Eventually, he traveled to the United States with his new wife and her son. Ironically, shortly after arriving in Miami, Emilio coincidentally met Maritza and Joandra. Joandra, now around 10 years old, did not recognize him. To her, he was a stranger. Emilio longed to embrace his daughter, but the child was visibly frightened. For Emilio, that moment was devastating. A painful reminder of all that he had lost and could never get back. Emilio had no choice but to keep moving forward, adapting to life in a new country, while clinging to the hope that one day he could repair his relationship with his daughter. He and his newlywed wife moved into a mobile home on a farm, where Emilio worked as a caretaker and property manager to make a living. The family struggled financially and barely made ends meet. But Emilio refused to return to Cuba under any circumstances. Despite the cramped living conditions, Emilio always kept a separate room prepared for his daughter, just in case she ever chose to live with him. He often admitted that Joandra occupied a special, irreplaceable place in his heart. He thought about her constantly, replaying memories and wondering how her life was unfolding without him. Emilio longed to reconnect with his child, but Maritza firmly opposed the idea of her daughter having a close relationship with her biological father. At that time, Joandra lived with her mother and stepfather in the Miami area, near North Lauderdale. By the time she completed elementary school, Joandra was considered one of the brightest students in her class. She was cheerful, sociable, quick-witted, and academically gifted. However, everything began to change once Joandra entered her teenage years. After transferring to Oakland Park Middle School, her behavior shifted noticeably. Her grades declined. She began skipping classes, and she grew increasingly withdrawn. When friends asked what was wrong, she hinted that things at home had become difficult. At first, her family attributed the changes to the stress of adjusting to a new school. But over time, the situation worsened. There were no reports of conflicts with classmates, yet Joandra seemed emotionally distant. At the age of 15, she began dating a boy named Angel. In November 1992, Joandra discovered she was pregnant. Terrified and unsure what to do, she eventually told her mother. Maritza's reaction was harsh. Rumors later circulated that Maritza had physically struck her daughter. Some people believe she used a belt to punish Joandra. These allegations were never officially confirmed, and no domestic violence reports were filed. Joandra herself never spoke publicly about abuse. Still, her friends believed that tension and poor communication at home were at the root of her emotional decline. Joandra reassured those closest to her that everything would soon return to normal. On the evening of Wednesday, November 25, 1992, Joandra unexpectedly offered to wash her parents' car, an unusual gesture that stood out. However, with Thanksgiving approaching the next morning, her family didn't give it much thought. Maritza and her husband assumed Joandra was simply trying to be helpful or make peace. The following morning, the household stirred awake, except for Joandra. She remained in her bedroom long after everyone else was up. After several hours passed, her continued silence became alarming. Maritza and her husband went to check on her. When they entered the room, they found Joandra lying on her back in bed, her eyes open, completely unresponsive. Panic set in instantly. Maritza called emergency services, but when paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. Joandra was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation determined that Joandra had died from a gunshot wound to the chest. She had used a .25 caliber pistol that belonged to her mother. The firearm was typically kept in the trunk of Maritza's car for self-defense. Investigators soon realized the significance of Joandra's offer to wash the car the night before. It had been a way to access the weapon. Initially, detectives examined the possibility of foul play involving family members. However, forensic evidence ruled that out. Gunshot residue was found on Joandra's hands, and her fingerprints were present on the weapon. A suicide note was also recovered. The medical examiner concluded that Joandra Núñez had taken her own life. Although Maritza and her husband remained under scrutiny for a short period due to standard investigative procedures, no evidence supported claims of violence or coercion. Ultimately, both were cleared, and the case was officially closed. Joandra's death devastated her family. The loss was incomprehensible. 3 days after Joandra's death, Emilio received a phone call from a friend. It was only then, barely an hour before the funeral, that he learned of his daughter's tragic fate. The news sent him into a state of uncontrollable rage. He immediately accused Joandra's mother and stepfather of deliberately hiding her death from him, robbing him of the chance to say goodbye. Emilio abandoned everything and rushed to the funeral. But instead of grieving quietly, he began aggressively questioning everyone in attendance. He was convinced that Maritza had played a direct role in pushing their daughter toward end her life. His anger intensified when he learned that Joandra had been 13 weeks pregnant, that her mother had allegedly scolded her repeatedly instead of offering comfort or support. Even during the funeral itself, Emilio openly threatened his ex-wife and her family. His behavior was considered alarming. Still, most people attributed his outbursts to overwhelming grief and emotional collapse. Law enforcement officers were present at the service, and Emilio approached them, hoping to uncover what he believed was the real cause of his daughter's death. When officers refused to share details or confirm his suspicions, Emilio became convinced that authorities were conspiring with Maritza to cover up the truth. In his mind, Joandra would never have taken her own life willingly. He was certain she had been driven to it, or worse, murdered. From that point forward, Emilio began stalking Maritza. He confronted her in grocery stores and public places, accusing her repeatedly of killing their daughter. His version of events grew increasingly erratic. At one point, he suggested that Joandra's stepfather might have been the father of her unborn child, implying abuse. Emilio ignored the fact that Joandra had left a suicide note identifying her boyfriend as the father. Emilio became convinced that Maritza had psychologically destroyed Joandra and manipulated her into ending her life. He criticized the official investigation, calling it superficial and prejudiced. He accused the detectives of not caring about immigrant families. Those close to Maritza believed the accusations were baseless. She was devastated by her daughter's death, sank into profound grief. Eventually, she sold the family home, unable to bear the pain of walking past Joandra's bedroom. Even after moving, Maritza would sometimes return to the neighborhood, sitting in her car near the house for long stretches, staring silently and crying. Her own way of coping with unbearable loss. Another reason for the move was Emilio's escalating harassment. His relentless threats, visible rage made Maritza and her husband fear for their young son's safety. They ultimately relocated to another part of Florida to stay with relatives. Maritza sought help from police and requested a restraining order against Emilio. Instead of granting it, officers discouraged her, warning that such an order might only provoke him further. Effectively, her request was denied. Nearly 2 months after Joandra's death, Emilio still could not locate Maritza and refused to let go of his obsession. Convinced that the person responsible for his daughter's death was walking free, he decided to seek public attention. In January 1993, he contacted a local news station, shared his version of events, accusing Joandra's mother and stepfather of driving her to end her life. His story caught the attention of journalist Ingrid Cruz, who saw a compelling human interest angle. She and a cameraman agreed to visit Emilio's mobile home on January 18th. Once the camera was rolling, Emilio recounted his story with intense emotion, vivid detail. His pain appeared raw, and the journalists found themselves moved by his anguish. After the interview, Ingrid and the cameraman suggested filming Emilio at Joandra's grave as a closing scene. Emilio agreed without hesitation. before heading to the cemetery. However, the journalists also decided to speak with Yoandra's boyfriend. He agreed to be interviewed and shared information that added new layers to the story. He revealed that Yoandra had, at times, spoken about wanting to end her life. He also believed that Maritza's harsh treatment had deeply affected her emotional state. He recalled Yoandra expressing a desire to leave her mother's home and return to live with her father. Words that, in hindsight, took on a haunting significance. After the interview with Yoandra's boyfriend ended, Ingrid and the cameraman headed to the cemetery, where Emilio was already present with his wife and child. He visited his daughter's grave every single day, leaving fresh flowers and remaining there quietly for about half an hour. But this visit would unfold very differently. As filming began, a car slowly passed by. By sheer coincidence, Maritza had also come to the cemetery that day to pay her respects to their daughter. While Emilio stood near the grave, Ingrid and the cameraman approached Maritza's vehicle. Ingrid knocked on the window and began asking questions. After placing flowers at the grave, Emilio noticed what was happening and rushed toward the car, shouting angrily at Maritza. Ingrid attempted to calm him, hoping to preserve the interview and de-escalate the situation. But emotions quickly spiraled out of control. Maritza did not respond. She remained silent and stayed in the car. Emilio suddenly turned away, walked back to his car, began searching for something inside. Moments later, Maritza stepped out of her vehicle, walked toward her daughter's grave. Ingrid followed her, continuing to ask questions. Emilio trailed behind them, shouting accusations, calling Maritza a traitor, blaming her for their daughter's death, and hurling insults. Maritza did not answer. She remained silent as she approached the grave. Suddenly, Emilio pulled out a handgun, shot Maritza in the back of the head. The shooting occurred directly in front of the journalists, and the entire act was captured on camera. Even after Maritza collapsed to the ground, Emilio's rage did not subside. He continued firing. In total, he discharged 12 rounds, 10 of which struck Maritza in the head, neck, chest, and back. When later asked why he had done it, Emilio showed no remorse. He calmly stated that killing Maritza might have saved his daughter's life. He then returned to his car and fled the scene. Ingrid was left in shock, frozen by what she had just witnessed. The cameraman, however, managed to remain composed and immediately called emergency services. Police arrived quickly, interviewed witnesses, secured the scene, launched a search for Emilio. His vehicle was soon discovered abandoned on the outskirts of the city. Emilio was gone, and so was the weapon. The murder of Maritza, following so closely after her daughter's death, became national news. Emilio was now a fugitive, considered armed and extremely dangerous. A massive manhunt began. Eventually, FBI agents received a tip that a man matching Emilio's description was traveling on a bus bound for Los Angeles. Authorities intercepted the bus in Texas. The bus was full of passengers. When Emilio realized law enforcement was approaching, he drew his weapon. Panic erupted, and passengers fled the bus. Fortunately, no one else was harmed. Emilio, then 34 years old, was quickly subdued and taken into custody. He was transported to the Midland County Detention Center. Footage of Maritza's final moments circulated across the world. Many media outlets have reported on this story as that of a distraught father seeking revenge on his ex-wife, whom he believes is the reason his daughter took her own life and for preventing him from being involved in her life. However, those familiar with the family's history strongly disagreed. They argued that what the cameras truly captured was not revenge, but a brutal act of domestic violence rooted in obsession and control. This narrative deeply angered Maritza's husband, Armando, who worked tirelessly to clear his late wife's name. Armando described Emilio not as a devoted father, but as a stalker. After his release from prison, Emilio began relentlessly harassing Maritza, who was simply trying to move on with her life. Armando detailed numerous incidents that painted Emilio as unstable and dangerous. He emphasized that Maritza had sought legal protection, but her request for a restraining order had been denied, an omission that would later prove fatal. Armando firmly denied all allegations that Maritza had ever physically abused Joandra. He rejected claims that she had slapped her daughter upon learning of the pregnancy, calling them outright fabrications invented by a man desperate to justify his obsession. According to Armando, Maritza did scold her daughter at times, especially when overwhelmed or confused, but she never resorted to violence. Most chilling of all, Armando revealed that Maritza had lived in constant fear of Emilio. So convinced was she that he would eventually kill her, especially after the restraining order was denied. That fear, tragically, was not misplaced. After his arrest, Emilio initially refused to cooperate with law enforcement or speak to journalists. For nearly a month, he maintained complete silence. Eventually, however, he agreed to speak publicly, largely repeating the same version of events he had told from the beginning. Around this time, both Maritza's parents and Emilio's parents entered the public discussion. Members of both families described Emilio as a volatile and aggressive man. According to relatives, during his first marriage in Cuba, he had repeatedly threatened to kill his wife. Several family members from both sides believed Emilio suffered from serious mental health problems. This view was indirectly supported even by his own parents, who admitted that their son had long struggled with emotional instability. Emilio's father recalled that while living in Havana, Emilio had been considered a below-average student and was forced to repeat the 4th grade. By the age of 16, his behavioral problems had noticeably intensified, though the family declined to provide specific details. Maritza's husband, Armando, later stated that his wife had initially wanted to preserve a peaceful relationship between Emilio and their daughter, even after relocating to the United States. However, Emilio's uncontrollable temper and unprovoked aggression made this impossible. Eventually, Maritza abandoned any hope of reconciliation, believing that continued contact posed a serious danger. As public debate intensified, Maritza was laid to rest beside her daughter, her grave located only a few steps from the spot where Emilio had murdered her. As additional information about Emilio's past came to light, many began to suspect that he had suffered from untreated mental illness for much of his life. Those issues were believed to have worsened during his incarceration in Cuba, regardless of any psychiatric treatment he may have received. Nevertheless, the public overwhelmingly wanted justice. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 1993, but the case was repeatedly delayed. It was not until January 19, 2000, nearly 7 years later, that a jury was finally seated. Throughout those years, Emilio Núñez's defense attorneys employed extensive delaying tactics. They repeatedly sought to have him declared legally insane, filed numerous motions, and demanded additional psychiatric evaluations, significantly prolonging the process. Emilio himself proved difficult to work with. He dismissed several attorneys, refusing to follow their legal advice, although an insanity defense appeared to be the most logical strategy given his mental health history. Emilio rejected it outright. He insisted on maintaining his narrative and portraying himself as a wronged father driven by grief. Tensions between Emilio and his legal team escalated to such an extent that he reportedly spat on one of his attorneys, prompting the lawyer to withdraw from the case. Over time, the murder of Maritza Martin became the oldest unresolved homicide case in the county, remaining in legal limbo for nearly 7 years. When the trial finally began, Emilio continued to claim that he had been overwhelmed by grief and mistreated by authorities. One of the first people targeted by his accusations was journalist Ingrid Cruz. Emilio alleged that she had exploited him for a sensational story, claiming he had been emotionally vulnerable and manipulated. His attorneys echoed this argument, portraying Ingrid as someone who deliberately asked provocative questions to incite his emotional breakdown. The defense even suggested that Ingrid had somehow orchestrated events so that Maritza and Emilio would be present at the cemetery simultaneously. However, no evidence supported these claims. Investigators concluded that the encounter was nothing more than a tragic coincidence. The trial lasted nearly a week. Despite the defense's attempts to shift blame onto the media, the evidence against Emilio was overwhelming. When the jury retired to deliberate, they returned with a guilty verdict in just 40 minutes. At sentencing, Emilio Núñez was given life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As he was escorted from the courtroom, he held up a handwritten sign declaring that he had not received a fair trial and told jurors that he would one day return to tell the real truth. Every appeal he later filed was denied. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Lauren Hugelmayer. Lauren Hugelmayer was born on June 9, 1988, in Los Angeles County, California. She was one of 3 daughters of Dale and Lori. Lauren grew up in a close-knit religious family that regularly attended their local church and was well loved in the community. She developed a reputation for being exceptionally kind, caring, known for her bright smile and vibrant personality. Lauren had a close bond with her older sister Beth, but she was even closer to her father, with whom she shared a trusting relationship. While in high school, Lauren met a classmate named Matthew Phelps, who would later play an important role in her life. At that time, it was unclear whether they were just acquaintances or had a closer relationship. After Lauren's family moved to North Carolina, Matthew transferred to another school, which interrupted their connection. After graduating from high school, Lauren chose to attend Appalachian State University, where she earned a degree in business administration and management in 2011. In 2014, Lauren received a direct message on Instagram from Matthew. While Lauren had a stable life, Matthew lived in Kent and faced significant challenges. His father was completely absent, and his mother had remarried several times. Matthew struggled to connect with any of his stepfathers. This lack of parental attention contributed to behavioral problems in his life. During high school, Matthew fell in with a bad crowd, began abusing alcohol and banned substance, particularly cough syrup, which is often misused for its psychoactive effects. His substance abuse became increasingly obvious, and his grades suffered as a result. In response, his grandparents decided to transfer him from public high school to a private Christian academy, hoping this change would help him turn his life around. Eventually, this decision paid off. Matthew improved his academic performance and distanced himself from negative influences. After graduating, he chose to enroll in a Baptist university with the goal of becoming a pastor. Although he later abandoned this ambition. Let's return to his online reunion with Lauren. Matthew and Lauren started talking to learn more about each other. They quickly discovered they had many shared interests, including being big fans of Star Wars and Harry Potter. They also connected through their strong Christian faith and then their desire to build a family together. As their conversations continued, they transitioned from chatting online to nearly daily phone calls. A few months later, they decided to enter a long-distance relationship. Their bond grew stronger, and Matthew made an effort to visit Lauren whenever possible. Eventually, he chose to move to North Carolina to be closer to her to deepen their relationship. Lauren was thrilled by this decision because she had always dreamed of finding someone with whom she could create a strong family. Most of Lauren's family welcomed Matthew, particularly her mother, who treated him like another son and tried to introduce him to the family. However, things were not as easy with Lauren's father, Dale. He seemed reluctant to accept Matthew as part of the family and often avoided him, Though the reasons for this were unclear, it might have just been a feeling. Despite this, Lauren's family made efforts to help Matthew feel more comfortable, and they eventually invited him to a family dinner. That night, while playing games and talking, Matthew surprised everyone by confessing that he was married before he got into a relationship with Lauren, but his marriage had ended. He did not provide any reasons for his divorce, which raised concerns for Dale. Dale felt that Matthew's refusal to explain might indicate that he had done something wrong, making Dale worry about his daughter's future. However, Lauren and the rest of the family seemed unconcerned about this issue. It was puzzling because despite their strong traditional values, none of them questioned Matthew's honesty or character. Lauren and Matthew continued their relationship. In 2015, they decided to get engaged. On November 11, 2016, they finally got married and hosted a big celebration. The wedding was a success, and since they were both fans of Star Wars, they chose this theme for the celebration. However, there was one unpleasant incident. Matthew's mother wore white to the wedding, despite being told that it was inappropriate. This suggested that she did not approve of Lauren. Additionally, Lauren's family found Matthew's mother rude and unpleasant. Dale expressed his discontent with the wedding due to lingering doubts about his son-in-law. He tried to suppress these feelings to avoid ruining his daughter's special day. After the wedding, Lauren and Matthew appeared very happy, with Lauren frequently posting pictures of herself and Matthew on social media, suggesting they had a perfect relationship. However, behind the scenes, their situation was more complicated. Matthew's coldness and contradictions began to show, revealing his true character. Their different childhood experiences turned them into different individuals. They both had what could be said to be different views on life, so problems began to arise. Additionally, Matthew's mother's rude behavior toward Lauren worsened the situation. For reasons unknown, she excluded Lauren from the family and often made her feel unwelcome. At that time, Lauren was independent and responsible, she even juggling 3 jobs because of her love for children. She volunteered at a children's Sunday school, worked as an auditor for a pharmaceutical company, and sold scented candles, which she enjoyed. Lauren also formed strong friendships with her colleagues, who appreciated her kindness and empathy. Lauren's dreams and plans were tragically shattered in the early hours of September 1, 2017. At midnight, emergency services received a distressing call from a man who sounded confused and embarrassed. He reported, "I turned on the light and saw her lying dead on the floor, and I have blood on me. There's a bloody knife on the bed, and I think I did it. I can't believe it. I'm right next to her." This man was Lauren's husband, Matthew. Matthew claimed he couldn't remember anything. He explained that before going to bed, he had taken a lot of cough syrup, which he believed caused him to commit this terrible act. When the police arrived, they found that Lauren was still alive. They rushed her to the hospital, however, despite their efforts, she sadly succumbed to her injuries and blood loss before reaching the hospital. When investigators examined the scene, they noticed it appeared too orderly, almost as if it had been staged. The knife was neatly placed on the bed, and the syrup was prominently displayed on the table, matching the details provided in the emergency call. However, they were surprised to find very little blood on Matthew, only a few drops on his shirt and shoes. This led them to suspect that an attempt had been made to clean up the scene before the emergency was reported, indicating that something more complicated was happening. Police believe it was not an accident. Additionally, the police noted Matthew's unusual behavior. He appeared calm despite expressing sadness over his wife's death. This made Matthew the prime suspect in the case, and he was eventually arrested. Authorities confiscated mobile phones, computers, documents, and journals containing Matthew's notes for investigation. A blood sample was also taken for toxicology tests. Investigators faced the difficult task of informing Lauren's family about these developments, leaving them devastated. An autopsy revealed that Lauren had suffered 123 stab and cut wounds. This raised the question, could an over-the-counter cough syrup turn a loving husband into a murderer? The syrup contains two active ingredients. Some believe that taking it in high doses can lead to euphoria, agitation, psychosis, and destructive behavior. To address these concerns, the product's manufacturer issued a statement expressing condolences to Lauren's family while also confirming that there was no evidence linking the syrup to violent behavior. Additionally, toxicology tests on Matthew showed that, although the syrup was detected in his blood, the dosage was not high enough to impact his mental state. Therefore, his claim that he was intoxicated by syrup when he attacked his wife was dismissed. The investigators aimed to understand what led Matthew to commit this act, so they conducted a detailed investigation, gathering information from family and friends. They discovered that Lauren and Matthew's relationship was not as ideal as it appeared in photos. Shortly after their wedding, they began experiencing various issues. Lauren was very independent and hardworking. In contrast, Matthew had a different attitude toward work. He was not motivated to work and often struggled to find or keep a job. Whenever he started a new job, he would quickly quit without explanation. Additionally, Matthew had a problem with overspending, particularly on unnecessary items like game consoles, video games, and online gaming subscriptions. Lauren and Matthew had a savings account for a trip to Disney. However, Matthew spent all the money without Lauren's consent or knowledge, even taking money from her purse, which amounted to stealing. This behavior caused frequent arguments between them. His excessive spending led to financial problems, which the Hugelmayer family recognized. Their relationship became increasingly strained, so Lauren expressed to family and friends that she might leave if things didn't improve. When asked why she hadn't taken that step, she cited her religious belief that everyone can be redeemed if they have faith. This belief motivated her to give her marriage a chance, but in reality, she found it difficult to tolerate her husband's behavior. Friends of Lauren reported that Matthew was controlling and jealous. He wrongly accused Lauren of having an affair with a church friend, despite there being no evidence to back this claim. Matthew had an irrational fear that Lauren would leave him, which stemmed from his previous marriage. He revealed to her that he divorced his first wife because she had been unfaithful, cheating on him with a church staff member. This experience left him in constant fear of abandonment. However, Matthew's behavior was inconsistent. He became very close to a neighbor and spent a lot of time with her. Even though he denied any romantic involvement, Lauren was convinced he was cheating on her with this neighbor. Despite her accusations, Matthew continued to see the woman. During police questioning, the neighbor claimed that their relationship was purely platonic. She explained that they connected because both were dealing with depression and anxiety. However, she noticed that Matthew had begun to discuss painful subjects, mostly related to death, prompting her to limit their interactions. At one point, Matthew claimed he had decided to return to college to pursue his dream of becoming a pastor, in an effort to win back Lauren's trust and save their relationship. Lauren reacted positively to this news. However, as time went on, their situation did not improve. Lauren's relatives observed that she had been in a very bad state and was no longer as happy as she used to be. They felt guilty for not intervening sooner. Lauren's older sister, Beth, made a significant statement. She recounted a phone call with Lauren the night before, during which Lauren was cooking dinner. During that call, the neighbor knocked on the door looking for Matthew. Without hesitation, Matthew left with the neighbor, leaving Lauren's dinner untouched. Beth expressed her frustration, saying she could no longer accept the situation and was convinced Matthew was cheating on Lauren, leading Lauren to decide to leave him. As the police gathered more evidence, the motive behind Lauren's death became clearer. The authorities conducted a detailed investigation of the apartment and confirmed their initial suspicions. Matthew had cleaned up before calling emergency services. Detectives also found what appeared to be an intimate diary of Matthew. This diary contained notes about his arguments with Lauren, his struggles with low self-esteem, and his feelings of insecurity in their marriage, especially since he knew her family had never accepted him. When experts examined Matthew's mobile phone, they discovered troubling search queries in his history. These included questions about the dangers of cough syrup and its effects on consciousness. This strongly suggested two things: first, that the attack was premeditated, and second, that Matthew was trying to mislead the authorities into thinking he was unaware of killing his wife while under the influence of the syrup. An important detail uncovered through Matthew's mobile phone revealed that just hours before he killed his wife, they had a heated argument through text messages and calls. Matthew claimed that Lauren accused him of cheating and expressed her desire to end their marriage, sufficient reason for a troubled mind to decide to kill his wife. Additionally, police discovered a secret Instagram account belonging to Matthew Under. The profile picture featured a character from the movie American Psycho, which is about a serial killer. His posts were filled with screenshots from the movie, and he even shared photos of himself dressed as one of its characters. Moreover, his posts contained themes that were completely contrary to Christian values, despite his self-identification as a believer. The last post was made just days before Lauren's murder and included disturbing photos of himself with a caption that read, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer," along with the hashtag "I found an angel that needs to be killed." Matthew's friend shared that he once expressed a fascination with killing, suggesting that taking a life would be a true joy. This troubling revelation paints a stark picture of Matthew, especially in light of statements made by his first wife concerning their separation. She revealed that their relationship, initially filled with common interests, deteriorated after marriage. Matthew began to overspend and failed to contribute financially. More alarmingly, he became abusive, often pulling her out of bed, throwing her to the floor, and assaulting her during his rages. This behavior left she terrified, leading her to seek a divorce. Her experience closely mirrors that of Lauren. During the trial, the defense argued that Matthew was not in his right mind during the crime and was likely suffering from instability and depression, worsened by substance use. They presented letters from Matthew's friends and colleagues to the court, claiming that his actions were out of character and that he was not a violent person. The trial occurred in October 2018. Although Matthew initially pleaded not guilty, he later accepted a plea agreement. On October 5, the judge found him guilty of first-degree involuntary manslaughter and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lauren's family is still deeply affected by her absence and feels guilty for not stopping her relationship. To honor her memory, they created a foundation focused on raising awareness about abusive relationships and domestic violence. Matthew Phelps was a manipulative person who only cared about his own needs, disguising himself as someone harmless. Sadly, Lauren's compassion blinded her to his true nature, and it may have only been in her final moments that she understood his true character. Unfortunately, there are many individuals like him who can deceive others with ease. In every peaceful town, behind every perfect family portrait, there can be a story no one dares to imagine. It was one of those quiet Italian communities where the days felt predictable, the streets felt safe, and the Del Grande family appeared to be everything a household should be: hardworking, respected, united. But behind the walls of their elegant home, something far more sinister had been growing for years. An emotional storm centered around one troubled son, and on a cold January night in 1998, that storm finally erupted. leaving a trail of devastation that shook Italy to its core. This is the story of Elia del Grande, the man who would turn his family home into a massacre scene. Elia del Grande was raised in a hard-working family. His father, Elia del Grande, had always been ambitious, studious, determined, and committed to building something of his own. Through years of dedication, he managed to open and grow a family bakery business that became well known in the area. Shortly after completing his studies, Elia met Alida, a driven young woman, 5 years his junior. They quickly began a relationship, married soon after, and welcomed their first son, Enrico. 5 years later, their second child, Elia, was born. They did not plan to have more children. They wanted to focus on expanding their business and raising their 2 sons, future heirs to the family enterprise. Enrico grew up intelligent, quiet, and diligent. Elia, on the other hand, was his complete opposite. From early childhood, Elia was energetic, impulsive, and increasingly difficult to control. Even Elia struggled with his temper. When Elia began attending school, his behavior only worsened. He frequently clashed with classmates, leading the family to consider placing him in a special program for troubled youth. In the end, they decided instead to have him live temporarily with his grandmother and aunt. For 3 years, Elia stayed with his relatives. When he returned home, his parents hoped that the change of environment had made a difference. At first, he seemed calmer, but soon the disruptive behavior resumed. When Elia graduated from school, the family hoped maturity would help him settle down. His parents did everything they could to support him, but their efforts failed. Elia had fallen into alcohol and banned substances use as a teenager, and after graduation, his addictions deepened. The Del Grande family lived together in a large home in Cadrazate, a peaceful town in northern Italy. Locals respected Elia, Alida, and Enrico for their kindness and work ethic. Elia, however, became famous for all the wrong reasons. By the mid-1992s, his behavior became increasingly dangerous. The turning point came when Elia attacked a taxi driver with a knife, inflicting serious injuries that cost the man an eye. Even then, his parents continued to support him. Yet they also recognized that drastic measures were needed. Because the family owned a property in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic, they decided to send Elia there in hopes that distance and structure would help him turn his life around. At first, the plan seemed promising. Elia found work at a family-run club in Santo Domingo, part of their broader business interests. But soon Elia and Alida learned that he had begun a relationship with a local woman, someone they believed had the same emotional instability and personal struggles as their son. The entire family opposed the relationship, fearing it would push him further off track. But Elia was stubborn. He insisted on marrying the woman, defying all objections. Every argument with his family ended with him threatening to run away permanently to start a new life with her. Tensions between Elia and his parents grew worse. Their disagreements became constant, and the household atmosphere deteriorated rapidly. Then came January 7, 1998. Its emergency operators received a chilling call that evening. A young man, barely able to speak and gasping for air, reported that someone had broken into the Del Grande home and shot the entire family. Before he could identify himself, the call abruptly ended. The dispatcher, alarmed and confused, immediately alerted the nearest patrol officer several kilometers from the villa. The Del Grande family was well known in the community. He was shocked that a shooting could have occurred in such a quiet, safe neighborhood. But instead of making quick assumptions, he approached cautiously, determined to understand what had really happened. When he reached the villa, everything looked eerily still. The house was dark, silent, no movement visible through the windows. Shortly after the patrol officer arrived, An ambulance pulled up to the address. The officer knocked repeatedly and rang the doorbell. But no one responded. He tried calling back the young man who had placed the emergency call, but the first attempt went unanswered. He dialed several more times. On the final call, someone picked up, yet no words followed. All he could hear was strained, panicked breathing. As if the caller was unable to speak, the situation clearly appeared dire. The officer decided he could not wait any longer. He forced open the door and stepped inside the house. Unsure whether the shooter was still present, he called for backup and moved cautiously forward with his weapon drawn. A quick sweep of the ground floor revealed nothing. So he proceeded upstairs. There, lying in a pool of blood near a telephone, he found a young man, 27-year-old Enrico Del Grande. Though gravely wounded, he was still alive. Emergency responders provided first aid and rushed him to the hospital. But he died shortly afterward. As the officer continued examining the home, he noticed heavy bloodstains across the living room and hallway. Following the trail, he reached the master bedroom. Beside the bed lay 53-year-old Alida Del Grande, already deceased from a gunshot wound. The room bore clear signs of a struggle. Items scattered across the floor and overturned objects indicated she had fought desperately for her life. But to no avail. The search continued through the villa until the officer reached the garage. There, next to the family car, he found the body of 58-year-old Enea Del Grande, the patriarch of the family. He had been shot multiple times in the back and head. He had died before help arrived. One person, however, was missing. The youngest son, Elia. Investigators searched the property, but he was nowhere to be found. Inside the house, they quickly noticed that one firearm from Enea's hunting rifle collection was missing. The caliber matched the bullets used in the killings. Shell casings were scattered near the victims, and an empty ammunition box was discovered in a closet. Yet far more rounds were missing than had been fired. Whoever committed the murders had fled heavily armed. Local residents were warned immediately. At first, authorities feared that the killer might have taken Elia hostage. Early speculation suggested a burglary gone wrong, but that theory quickly collapsed. Aside from the missing rifle, nothing valuable had been taken. Jewelry, electronics, cash, all untouched. There were no signs of forced entry on any door or window. These facts pointed to one conclusion: this was not a robbery. It was personal. And driven by hatred, the search for 22-year-old Elia Del Grande escalated rapidly. Within hours, the scenario shifted from a potential kidnapping to a manhunt for the primary and only suspect. Carabinieri investigators began gathering background information on the family, and the picture that emerged was troubling. These suspicions were reinforced when investigators confirmed Elia had a previous criminal record for a particularly brutal incident involving a taxi driver. When police interviewed the man who survived that attack, he recounted the event with visible emotion. It occurred shortly after Elia turned 17. The man, a local driver well known to the Del Grande family, had often driven Elia home after nights out. On that night, Elia had been agitated from the moment he got into the car. The driver, familiar with Elia's volatile temper, tried not to provoke him and remained silent. It made no difference. Without warning or apparent reason, Elia suddenly lunged at him, stabbing him repeatedly and inflicting injuries so severe that the driver lost an eye. The incident deeply alarmed investigators and raised serious concerns about Elia's mental stability. While searching his room, police uncovered a large collection of bladed weapons. Those who knew him described this fascination as an obsession. He owned nearly 100 knives of various shapes, sizes. Former classmates and teachers recalled him as impulsive, easily provoked, frequently involved in conflicts both inside and outside of school. He also gravitated toward extremist circles and was known to have associated with a group of local skinheads. Investigators soon discovered that the Del Grande family had tried everything to help him. yet nothing seemed to make a lasting difference. In an effort to pull their son out of his downward spiral, his parents eventually made a drastic decision. They sent Elia to Santo Domingo. The family owned several properties there, including a nightclub that was popular with locals. They believed that distancing him from the troubled friendships he had formed in Italy would give him a fresh start. At first, the change of scenery seemed promising. Elia found work at the family's nightclub, and for a brief period his parents hoped he might eventually take a stable role in the business. But those hopes quickly faded. The nightclub scene was no less problematic than the environment he had left behind. It attracted all kinds of questionable characters, and hard-banned substances were readily available. It was there. Investigators believe that Elia, who had previously used only softer substances, began experimenting with much more dangerous ones. Even worse, he soon became involved with a young Dominican woman who works as an escort, servicing truck drivers. Instead of keeping his distance, Elia became infatuated with her and immersed himself in a chaotic lifestyle. Elia began financially supporting the woman, hoping she might leave escort. He paid for everything: her food, rent, clothing, and mounting personal debts. Month after month, he poured more money into the relationship for Elia. His obsession with the young woman soon became as consuming as his fascination with weapons. Initially, he tried to hide the relationship from his family, but they quickly noticed that Elia's spending had spiraled out of control. He was wasting large sums not only on the woman but also on prohibited substances and other illegal activities. Concerned, his older brother Enrico traveled to Santo Domingo to confront him. When Enrico discovered the full extent of the situation, he immediately informed their parents. They insisted Elia return to Italy. But by then he refused to leave the Dominican Republic. Tensions within the family escalated. After Enrico's failed attempt to bring Elia home, Elia wrote an angry letter in which he openly expressed contempt for his parents and hinted that things would end badly if they continued interfering in his life. Still, the Del Grande family was determined. Shortly before Christmas 1997, they finally convinced Elia to return to Italy. But once he arrived back home, arguments resumed almost immediately, always revolving around the same topic: the woman from Santo Domingo. No one in the family wanted her entering their lives or their home. The hostility continued to grow, and Elia's resentment intensified. According to the reconstructed timeline, on the evening of January 6, 1998, Elia and his parents went to a local pizzeria for dinner. There, he once again brought up his desire to return to the Dominican Republic to marry the woman. He insisted he planned to wed her on January 10. To his parents, this sounded reckless and dangerous. Exhausted by his behavior, they struggled to stay calm. They had no intention of allowing their son to marry an escort. A heated argument erupted once more. Elia left abruptly and did not return home with his parents. Instead, he went to visit a friend, 33-year-old Pier Angelo, a stable hand from Vergiate and one of Elia's longtime acquaintances. This visit was no coincidence. Pier Angelo later told investigators that they spent most of the night drinking and talking. But this was not completely true. Elia had taken prohibited substances and left around 3 a.m. Agitated and fueled by anger, Pier admitted that Elia talked about wanting revenge that night. But he insisted he had not taken the threats seriously. In his words, Elia's dark, sarcastic humor often blurred the line between a joke and something far more sinister. Further investigation revealed that after returning home, Elia immediately seized one of his father's rifles. He loaded the weapon and headed straight to his parents' bedroom. He fired 2 shots at his mother and 2 more at his father. Though gravely wounded, his father managed to stagger toward the garage in a desperate attempt to escape. His mother tried to fight back, but she was overpowered almost instantly. Elia then moved to the living room, where his older brother, Enrico, was asleep. Enrico had already been jolted awake by the gunfire. He was shot twice as well. After he lost consciousness, Elia began staging the scene as a robbery. He scattered various objects throughout the house, took one of the family rifles along with ammunition, and fled the home. Despite his injuries, Enrico managed to call emergency services. In the hours that followed, Elia contacted several acquaintances and transferred yet another large sum of money to his girlfriend in the Dominican Republic. By dawn, he was already inside a taxi headed toward the Swiss border. His flight was short-lived, thanks to a rapid international alert. Swiss authorities stopped him at a border checkpoint. His strange demeanor raised immediate suspicion, and the guards detained him before notifying the Italian Carabinieri. Shortly thereafter, Elia was interrogated. He confessed to the triple homicide almost immediately. What shocked investigators most was his utter lack of remorse. His behavior from the very beginning suggested profound psychological instability. Mental health professionals evaluated him and diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder. He struggled with explosive anger, impulsivity, and a severe dependence on hard prohibited substances, yet no one had ever ensured he received treatment in a specialized facility. When speaking about his past, Elia often described the family environment as far from harmonious. Contrary to the image the Del Grande family presented to the outside world, he recalled with bitterness the years he spent living with his grandmother and aunt, describing them as a time of deep loneliness. According to him, both women resorted to physical punishment to control him. He said, feeling unloved and mistreated had caused lasting psychological trauma. Elia portrayed his mother not as a warm, affectionate figure, but as a harsh, controlling woman who used yelling, insults, and physical discipline to enforce her rules. His father, he claimed, was no different. Psychiatric experts later testified that such an upbringing, combined with his personality traits, could have contributed to his chronic low self-esteem, emotional instability, and the persistent feeling of being judged or monitored. These factors, together with his escalating substance abuse, likely accelerated his psychological decline. After his first trial, Elia Del Grande received 3 life sentences. However, during the appeal, the court reduced the sentence to 30 years, ruling that he was only partially sane at the time of the killings. Even in prison, Elia's behavior continued to deteriorate. He attempted to escape multiple times and provoked frequent conflicts despite the high security conditions. One escape attempt actually succeeded, though only briefly. Investigators later concluded that he may have been assisted by his common-law wife, whom he had met while on a semi-open prison regime. A taxi driver proved instrumental in identifying him. He had been paid 400 euros by a woman to pick up someone outside the prison perimeter. During the ride, the driver noticed that the passenger kept hiding his face. Suspicious, he went to the police after completing the trip, helping authorities track down and recapture Elia. Elia was captured while trying to reach Sardinia and received an additional 8-month sentence. In practice, though, it made little difference, because he did not end up serving the full 30 years. Then came an unexpected, highly controversial development. In 2025, after serving just 25 years, Elia was granted early release, transferred to a semi-open facility in Olbia, Sardinia. The decision sparked immediate outrage. Residents were furious and frightened at the prospect of living near a man who had killed his entire family and who had repeatedly shown he was capable of violence. And almost immediately, Elia validated their fears. From the very first days, it became clear that he could not adjust to ordinary life. He frequently argued with neighbors, clashed with residents, and provoked multiple complaints. Some said he harassed people. Others insisted he was simply too dangerous to be living freely within the community. As a result, his freedom was restricted once again. A court ordered him to spend 6 months in a work release facility in Castelfranco Emilia, in the province of Modena, after which his case would be reviewed again. This institution was a mixed facility where inmates of different profiles lived together. At the time of Aaliyah's transfer, around 40 individuals classified as dangerous to society were housed there, along with another 45 prisoners in various stages of social reintegration. Many had already been granted semi-freedom, which allowed them to go into town each day for work. The decision to house a convicted triple murderer in such an environment was met with significant criticism. Even law enforcement officers acknowledged that criminals with vastly different behavioral patterns require different levels of supervision. That reality soon became painfully clear. On the evening of October 30, 2025, Aaliyah managed to escape. Using a makeshift rope crafted from electrical cords taken from household appliances, he lowered himself from a window located on the only side of the building, not protected by fencing. No one realized he was gone until the next morning's head count. Surveillance cameras captured his escape. A large-scale search operation began immediately. But the first hours yielded nothing. No inmates in the facility appeared to know anything about Aaliyah's plan, and he left behind no obvious clues. After examining his background, detectives concluded that he was likely still in Italy, probably hiding in areas familiar to him. Patrols searched roads, bus terminals, train stations, rural paths, and abandoned farmhouses. Dozens of CCTV recordings were collected, but none led to him. Then Aaliyah reached out himself. On November 6, Novosti Varese received a letter signed by Aaliyah Del Grande. In it, he attempted to justify his escape. He expressed remorse for his past actions but insisted he could not remain in the workhouse. He criticized the reintegration facility, describing it as a poor imitation of a real prison, one that lacked meaningful rehabilitation programs. He claimed that psychotropic medications and prohibited substances circulated freely inside, and that many inmates were forced to remain far longer than necessary simply because they had no home or family waiting for them outside. According to Aaliyah, his escape was not an attempt to avoid punishment, but a choice driven by desperation, a way to spend the rest of his life in a more peaceful place. The letter ignited nationwide debate. On one hand, complaints about such institutions had existed for years. On the other, a man who had murdered his entire family was openly on the run and considered extremely dangerous. Authorities intensified their search. Eventually, investigators traced Aaliyah to Lake Monate. Under cover of darkness, he used a pedal boat to cross the lake, temporarily eluding patrols on the ground. But his efforts only delayed the inevitable. After 13 days on the run, on November 12, 2025, officers located him hiding in a small house near his childhood home in Cadrazate. He offered no resistance when arrested. The investigation into his escape is still ongoing, as detectives suspect he did not act alone. Now 50 years old, Aaliyah Del Grande has been returned to custody. Even so, Aaliyah is expected to be released again in just 4 years. His case has sparked national reflection, not only about public safety, but also about the structure and limitations of the Italian justice system. One question remains at the center of the debate. Can someone who murdered his entire family ever truly reintegrate into society? Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alice Trappler. On April 19, 2012, an incident occurred in a remote area of upstate New York. At approximately 11 p.m., Frank Bennett called 911 to report that an intruder had broken into his home and killed his son, Daniel Bennett. After the attack, the intruder fled the scene. Frank reported that he did not witness the crime. He was in the basement when he heard the front door open and the lights turn on. A short time later, he heard a loud bang. Frank quickly ran upstairs, but when he reached the first floor, he only heard the sound of cars on the street. The mysterious intruder was gone, leaving behind a lifeless body. When the police arrived, they found Frank outside the house, in shock at what he had witnessed. The father could not believe that his beloved son was dead, and he was also afraid that the killer might return. After calming down, Frank's account was confirmed. The police entered the house and found Daniel lying on the sofa in the living room. It appeared that he had been attacked unexpectedly while he was sleeping. After examining the crime scene, forensic experts quickly discovered a spent ammunition box outside the door. It was clear that this was not a robbery because no valuables were missing, and there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The attacker had acted quickly, suggesting that the murder occurred in just a few seconds. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. Given the situation, the police suspected that it might be due to personal reasons. They began investigating Daniel's family and friends to gather more information. Frank suggested a possible motive for this violent act. His son was scheduled to appear in court the next day to fight for custody of his 5-month-old daughter, Lily. The divorce with Alice had been very difficult. Police considered Daniel's wife, Alice Trappler, to be the prime suspect in the case. Alice Trappler grew up in a small town called Edison. However, she was born in Philadelphia, where she lived with her parents before they bought a farm away from the city to raise their children. After graduating from high school, Alice moved away, attended college, and began working on a construction site in Texas. She eventually returned to Philadelphia and became a successful landscape designer. Alice was an energetic girl from a small town. As a child, she was a bit mischievous, but that did not affect her close relationship with her parents. She often drove 4 hours to Edison to visit them on weekends. During one of these visits, she met Thomas Wesley Borden, who became her first husband. This meeting took place in 2002. He had a troubled past, having dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Then a series of troubles began to plague him. Thomas often stole small items, had no steady job, and frequently worked as a repairman on local farms. This was his situation when he met Alice. He immediately fell in love with her vibrant and energetic personality. Thomas was attracted to Alice's natural beauty and intelligence. They had similar personalities, as they were both energetic and outgoing. At the time, Alice was in a relationship with another man, but she ended it for Thomas, and their romance quickly blossomed. Within 6 months, they were married and moved to Philadelphia, where Alice owned a house. Thomas supported Alice in everything. Alice had always dreamed of having a large family, but she struggled to conceive. Therefore, she took on the role of stepmother to Thomas's 2 daughters from a previous marriage. However, after only a few months of living together, Alice realized that she did not truly understand Thomas and had rushed into the marriage. At first, she tried to control their situation, but soon discovered that Thomas was unpredictable and irresponsible. He would often leave home for days at a time, leaving Alice and the children behind. This behavior frustrated Alice, while Thomas grew tired of her worries. Moreover, he showed little concern for Alice's feelings. Although she tried to maintain the marriage for 4 years, Alice eventually lost patience. She did not want to leave Thomas's children, to whom she was very attached, in the care of their irresponsible father. So, she filed for divorce and also requested custody. In 2009, a challenging trial began, with neither side willing to compromise. Finally, they reached an agreement that the girls would live with their paternal grandparents, who would take good care of them. Thomas's children still visit Alice in Edison regularly. After moving in with her mother in 2010, Alice bought an old farmhouse. She renovated the house, making use of her construction skills. Her business is thriving and is expected to grow even more in the near future. Overall, her life has improved significantly since the divorce. She has yet to realize her dream of having children of her own and rarely sees Thomas's children. Living alone has become boring for her. Her life changed dramatically when a new man, Daniel Bennett, entered her life. They met online in late 2010. He also grew up on a farm and is a strong man who always helps his parents with hard work. Daniel has a stubborn personality and can be rude, but he has never been in trouble with the law. In February 2011, Alice learned that she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she shared the news with Daniel, who was also delighted and decided to move in with her. They soon got married, but Alice's controlling nature soon emerged. She wanted to control every aspect of their lives, while Daniel valued his freedom and did not like being controlled. This led to frequent minor disagreements. These conflicts escalated, resulting in increasingly irrational arguments over small issues, which left Daniel frustrated. Just 6 months after meeting, the couple decided to split after Alice hit Daniel over the head with a coffee pot. He moved out, calling her crazy, and returned to live with his parents. However, Daniel still wanted to be involved in his daughter's life after she was born and sought to share custody, so he made an effort to maintain a relationship with Alice. Daniel contacted her almost every day to check on her well-being, but Alice never responded. She ignored all his messages, which frustrated him. Their relationship was strained. Alice often behaved rudely and even threatened him. She said that their communication felt like a conflict. In addition, she refused to see him and was hostile on the phone. It seemed that she did not want to maintain a relationship with him and did not want him to be a part of their child's life. 7 months after their separation, a baby girl was born. Alice did not inform Daniel about the birth and forbade him from seeing the child. This was a significant blow to Daniel, who had been pleading to see his daughter. However, Alice remained steadfast in her decision. So Daniel sought legal help to resolve the situation. According to the lawyer, the mother had no right to deny the father access to his daughter, but to prove this, a trial was necessary. Consequently, Daniel filed a lawsuit in family court to gain access to his child. The proceedings could be lengthy. Finally, a court date was set for April 20. This was a hopeful moment for Daniel, but the hearing never took place. He was murdered in his home the day before. Officers who arrived at the scene spoke to neighbors, some of whom confirmed hearing a loud bang just before an SUV drove away. The front door of the house was open, and Daniel was found dead. The only evidence was a spent 12-gauge cartridge case. A ballistics test is pending, which may provide further clues. Frank said that Daniel often complained about Alice's controlling behavior, especially after they split up when she forbade him from visiting their daughter. After breaking up with Alice, Daniel moved in with his father. On the day Daniel was killed, he was relaxing in front of the TV after a long day at work and fell asleep just before he was murdered. Frank also recalled that last Christmas, Alice called him out of the blue and asked to meet so he could see his granddaughter. He was delighted and agreed, but he used the opportunity to convince Alice to allow Daniel to see their child. He believed that children should have a relationship with both their father and mother. However, Alice became defensive and firmly stated that she would never allow Daniel to see their child. Frank was extremely upset, feeling that Alice's decision was both illegal and unjustified. He believed that Daniel would make a great father and saw no justification for Alice's restrictions. After Alice's call, Daniel sought legal help and went to court, but his hearing was repeatedly postponed until it was rescheduled. Tragically, a murderer disrupted all his plans. The police quickly established a motive for the crime, believing that the connection was not random. First, they needed to talk to Alice, who arrived at the courthouse at around 5 a.m., the day after the murder. Just hours later, Lily's custody hearing took place. The police considered her the prime suspect, and at that time, she was living in Edison, 30 kilometers from the scene of the tragedy. Alice was surprisingly calm when she heard the news of her ex-husband's death. When the police spoke to Alice, it was clear that she was very angry with him. She recounted that he had often insulted her and had been abusive throughout their time together. Alice described Daniel as a bad person who struggled with drug addiction. She also mentioned that they were in a custody battle over their daughter, a legal struggle that Daniel had initiated, and that she was determined not to give in to him. Despite this hostility, Alice insisted that she had nothing to do with the murder. She claimed that she had an alibi for the time of the incident, stating that she was at home with her mother, who later confirmed her story. When asked about a handgun, Alice denied ever having used it, and the police confirmed that the weapon was not registered in her name. However, this did not eliminate her as a suspect, as she could have purchased the weapon illegally, and her alibi was not entirely reliable. Unfortunately, the police were unable to find any information that could advance the case. They then chose to investigate Daniel's other acquaintances and friends who might have had a motive for the crime. Many described Daniel as a difficult person who frequently got into fights at bars. As a result, the police identified several potential suspects who had conflicts with Daniel in various ways. They compiled a long list of these individuals and began interviewing them. Although each had grievances against Daniel, none had a strong motive for the murder. The investigation was losing momentum, and it was clear that a vital lead was needed, as there were too many angry residents in the city who might want to take revenge on him. It was necessary to narrow down the list of suspects. One of Daniel's neighbors went to the police station after the murder. While she was getting the mail, she discovered a shotgun shell casing on the road. Concerned, she reported her discovery to the sheriff's department. At first glance, the shell casing did not seem unusual since hunting season had just begun, and many people in rural areas used that type of ammunition. However, because it was close to the crime scene, it had the potential to be important evidence. When the police arrived, they compared the shell casing to the one that caused Daniel's death. They found that they were an exact match. The police were then able to trace the shell casing to the store where it was purchased. They searched the area around where the shell casing was found and discovered 3 more shell casings. All of these had been purchased from the hunting section of a local Walmart. This discovery provided a vital lead in the investigation. The police requested surveillance footage from the store and reviewed it. They identified a man who had purchased the boxes of ammunition just 4 hours before the murder, around 7 p.m. The footage clearly showed him, and the police were able to track him as he left the store, including his license plate, thanks to outdoor cameras. The police quickly identified the owner of one of the vehicles as Thomas West Borden, Alice's first husband. While this footage was not enough to convict him, it was a clue for the police to investigate Thomas further. They had 2 main suspects, Alice and Thomas. It was likely that they had planned to kill Daniel together. While Thomas could be considered a potential perpetrator or accomplice, the only evidence against him was the purchase of the ammunition. Alice was not officially considered a suspect because she had an alibi confirmed by her mother. The GPS on her phone showed that she was at home, but the seasoned police officer suspected that she might be the mastermind behind the events. The police contacted Thomas, asking him to come to the station for questioning without providing a specific reason. They hoped to indirectly confirm their suspicions through him. However, Thomas informed the police over the phone that he was out of town at the time of the call. He could not provide an exact date for his return, saying that he could be absent for 2 weeks to a month due to important business. He then stated that unless the police had a warrant for his arrest, he had no intention of going to the police station over a minor matter. This situation raised suspicion, and he understood why they wanted to talk to him. As the phone conversation continued, Thomas became increasingly anxious. At one point, he suddenly declared that he would kill himself if the pressure did not ease. The police realized the urgency of the situation and knew that they needed to quickly locate Thomas before he did anything drastic. They decided to track the GPS location of the call and found him near a cell tower in a suburb of Philadelphia, along with his car. Soon, the pursuit began. The chase lasted only a few blocks before Thomas abandoned his pickup truck in a parking lot and fled on foot. However, another police unit arrived to stop him. Thomas gave a false name, but when asked for identification, he surrendered his driver's license. When the officers discovered the lie, they acted quickly to arrest him. Thomas began to run away again, leading several cars and police officers to chase him. They pursued him to the nearest train tracks, possibly because he intended to use the train to escape and distract the police. However, Thomas was exhausted and realized that he could not outrun them. In a moment of desperation, he jumped in front of a train and took his own life. Some even blamed the police for his death. This development left the police without their only lead regarding Daniel's murder. In their desperation, the police decided to talk to people who had interacted with Thomas in the days before his death. Thomas's half-brother Nathan Hand lived with him. Shortly before Daniel's murder, Thomas had moved in with Nathan, and they spent a lot of time together. During this period, Thomas rekindled his relationship with Alice and felt happy, as he had struggled to cope with their breakup. He had hoped to reunite with her, so he agreed to resume contact. However, Nathan suspected that Alice had an ulterior motive for returning to Thomas. Nathan said that just before the incident, Alice had made a request regarding Daniel. For the sake of the person he loved, Thomas agreed to everything and followed Alice's instructions. Nathan recalled that at around 8 p.m. on April 19, Thomas returned from Walmart and quickly began preparing for something important, saying that he would confront Daniel at Alice's request. Nathan observed that Thomas was wearing camouflage pants, a dark shirt, and a mask. When asked about his plans, Thomas insisted that he would confront Daniel. Nathan tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. Thomas asked Nathan to drive him to Daniel's house. During the drive, Thomas revealed that he not only intended to beat Daniel, but also to kill him. He was determined to get rid of Daniel once and for all, despite Nathan's attempts to convince him otherwise. Thomas also mentioned that this plan originated with Alice. He kept in touch with her throughout the evening via phone and text messages. When they arrived at Daniel's house around 11 p.m., Thomas retrieved the weapons from the trunk of the car. He claimed that Alice had given him the weapons for this purpose and that he had purchased the ammunition. They got out of the car and stood on either side of the front door. Nathan pushed the door open and turned on the lights, allowing Thomas to rush inside and kill Daniel. They then fled the scene, jumping into the car and driving away. As they left, Thomas threw the remaining shell casings out the window, landing in a neighbor's yard and eventually leading the police to their door. Nathan claimed that they buried the weapons at the park. Police were able to locate the weapon based on Nathan's description. He also mentioned that Alice was not present during the attack. She was at home and was in contact with Thomas on the phone. Nathan was arrested in connection with the crime. On April 24, a deputy sheriff visited Alice's home, and she denied any involvement in the crime. In 2013, Alice went to trial for the murder of Daniel Bennett. She was charged with multiple crimes, facing a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. By this time, Thomas, the real perpetrator, was dead. The prosecution argued that he was just a pawn controlled by the real mastermind behind the crime. They believed that Alice had planned and manipulated Thomas into carrying out the act. The prosecution gathered a significant amount of evidence that linked Alice to the crime. Evidence included correspondence between her and Thomas discussing the case, as well as surveillance camera footage showing Thomas purchasing ammunition. Additionally, Thomas's half-brother Nathan confirmed Alice's involvement in the crime. Nathan Hand reached a plea deal to shorten his sentence by pleading guilty to manslaughter in exchange for helping to solve the case, resulting in a 9-year prison sentence. The defense attempted to exonerate Alice, acknowledging her hostility toward Daniel. They argued that the situation was an act of self-defense, claiming that Alice had endured domestic violence for 6 months. They asserted that Alice, a victim of violence as a child, was determined to prevent her daughter from experiencing the same, which explained her strong opposition to sharing custody with Daniel. After deliberations, the jury unanimously convicted Alice Trappler of premeditated murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Throughout the trial, she remained calm, showing no remorse or emotion. Alice expressed dissatisfaction with her 25-year prison sentence and filed several appeals, all of which were rejected. In a quiet seaside town, what began as a simple late-night stroll between two former school friends, Michaela and Jaliek Keene, who had recently returned from overseas, quickly turned into one of the most shocking cases the community had ever faced. The next morning, Michaela was missing. Her phone was found left on campus. And within 48 hours, the search teams made a horrifying discovery. They found Michaela's body with brutal injuries. She had been savagely murdered and her body hidden in the woods. Michaela Conley had lived in Bar Harbor for 19 years with her mother and stepfather. Bar Harbor, located on Mount Desert Island near Acadia National Park, is a small town known for its natural beauty and steady stream of tourists. On May 31, 2018, she drove to Boston to pick up her friend, Jaliek Keene, at Logan Airport and bring him back her home. Michaela and Jaliek had gone to the same school, Mount Desert Island High School. Jaliek graduated in 2015, while Michaela was still in the 10th grade. He played on the school's soccer team and had recently returned from Serbia, where he had been playing for an amateur club called the Kova Royal Crowns. They returned to her house later that evening. Around 2 a.m., Michaela and Jaliek decided to go out for a walk. But Michaela never came home. The next morning, Jaliek went back to Michaela's house and told her mother that he was there to retrieve his cell phone, wallet, which he claimed he had left in Michaela's room. Her mother, Danielle Timoney, was surprised to learn that Michaela had not returned the previous night. Jaliek told her they had gotten into an argument and that he had walked away, leaving Michaela alone. According to him, he hadn't seen her since. Danielle immediately contacted the police to report her daughter missing. That same morning, Michaela's cell phone was found on the grounds of the Connors Emerson School. A school employee turned it over to Danielle, who confirmed it belonged to her daughter. Further investigation revealed that at 2:19 a.m. on June 1, 2018, a video had been uploaded to Snapchat from Michaela's phone. The footage clearly showed Michaela and Jaliek together at a playground near the Connors Emerson School. Then, on June 2, 2018, a team of search and rescue dogs from the Maine State Police discovered human remains in a wooded area near Connors Emerson High School. The body was partially hidden beneath bamboo stalks and other vegetation. The remains were later confirmed to be those of Michaela Conley. Initial examination results indicated Michaela suffered head and facial injuries from a blunt object, as well as signs of strangulation. Additional abrasions, bruises across her torso, and limbs indicated that her body had been dragged and sustained further injuries. In the medical examiner's opinion, Michaela died from a combination of head trauma and strangulation. Her death was officially ruled a homicide. Jaliek Keene was questioned, even before Michaela's body was discovered. Detectives Jason Fuller and Paul White of the Maine State Police conducted the interview. During questioning, Jalik admitted that Michaela had picked him up from Logan Airport and driven him back to Bar Harbor. He said he spent time with her at her house until the early hours of the morning. He confirmed that they had entered the Connors Emerson campus together around 2:00 a.m., which was later verified through surveillance footage. He claimed they spent about an hour on school grounds, during which they kissed and intimate. Afterward, he said Michaela became upset, and they argued. Jalik showed investigators scratches on his back, saying she scratched him. He insisted that he left her around 3:30 a.m. and never saw her again. On June 3, investigators conducted a site walkthrough with Jalik before questioning him again. Investigators then obtained video from surveillance cameras around the school. After reviewing the footage, they determined that at 2:17 a.m., Michaela and Jalik were walking along the path from Eden Street toward Connors Emerson School. They then moved out of view toward the playground on the Eden Street side. Another camera mounted on the building facing Eden Street captured the next moments. Although the footage was grainy and partially obscured by a cobweb, investigators were able to identify a figure believed to be Michaela. A man resembling Jalik approached her. After a brief interaction, he lifted her onto his shoulder and walked away while she struggled visibly, kicking her legs wildly. At approximately 7:05 a.m., the video shows a person pushing a lawnmower out of frame. Moments later, Jalik appeared from behind a row of bushes with Michaela's lifeless body. He grabbed her wrist and carried her quickly toward the wooded area where her remains were later found. He was wearing the same black clothing seen earlier in the night, and the distinctive tattoo on his left forearm, noticed by detectives during his interview, was clearly visible. The footage directly contradicted his repeated claim that he had left Michaela at 3:30 a.m. and never saw her again. No other individuals appeared on any of the footage. Following the discovery of the body and the review of surveillance footage, Jalik Keen was arrested and charged, but he continued to claim innocence. About 50 of Michaela's relatives and friends filled the courtroom during the trial. State prosecutors stated that Jalik's DNA was found under Michaela's fingernails and inside her body. Physically, she never stood a chance against him. Michaela was only 5'4" and weighed about 95 pounds, while Jalik was 6 feet tall and had weighed 180 pounds in 2015, according to his profile on the West Virginia University soccer team roster. The defense attorney argued that the state's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and that prosecutors could not definitively prove that Jalik killed Michaela. He suggested someone else might have been on the school grounds and managed to evade the cameras. He noted that cigarette butts and an empty alcohol bottle found on the playground had never been examined to identify potential alternative suspects. He argued that the state lacked concrete proof of exactly how Michaela was fatally injured. According to him, the circumstantial evidence did not lead to certainty, only speculation. During the trial, Jalik was shown a video, recorded on the grounds of Connors Emerson School, that appeared to show him carrying Michaela's lifeless body and, later, washing himself at a urinal. Jalik claimed he had no memory of the events captured in the footage. Both prosecution and defense questioned him extensively. He said he had been awake for nearly 36 hours, having just returned from an international flight from Serbia, where he had been playing soccer. According to him, he remembered nothing from that early morning until he arrived at Michaela's house, where he had supposedly left his phone and wallet. In May 2019, the jury found Jalik Keen guilty. The verdict was formally delivered on September 11. During sentencing, the judge remarked that Keen's refusal to fully accept responsibility, despite the video evidence, was appalling. He added that it was equally disturbing that Keen went to Michaela's mother only minutes after killing her, pretending to be concerned for her daughter. Jalik Keen, 22, was sentenced to 58 years in prison for murder, along with an additional 30 years on related charges, to be served concurrently. Crystal Beira Nieves moved to New York from Puerto Rico in 2019 with her mother and 14-year-old brother. Over time, they settled into their new life, Crystal and her brother attended school, while their mother, Christy, found work and did everything she could to support her children. In 2021, Crystal graduated from high school and began searching for a job, but without formal qualifications. Her options were limited, and she applied for a position at the Burger King on 116th Street in East Harlem, just a few blocks from their apartment. Working as a cashier at a fast food restaurant wasn't what she envisioned for herself. She dreamed of going to college and learning a skilled profession that would lead to better opportunities. For now, however, Crystal focused on saving money to buy her first car, something she wanted to earn entirely on her own. Crystal faced several challenges during her early days on the job. Her initial work schedule placed her on night shifts. East Harlem had long struggled with social issues, including high crime rates, and Crystal felt understandably uneasy about working late hours. Homeless individuals often gathered outside the restaurant at night, and this frightened her. Concerned for her safety, she asked her manager to move her to the day shift. She was promised the schedule change beginning January 14, 2022. As she worked through her final days on the night shift, the anxiety only grew stronger. On the evening of January 9, 2022, Crystal prepared to leave for one of her last late-night shifts. Before stepping out, she told her mother she didn't want to go because she was afraid of the people who lingered around the restaurant after dark. But her mother insisted Crystal needed to take responsibility and finish her assigned shifts. Crystal went to work, and that was the last time her mother ever saw her alive. Upon arriving, Crystal changed into her uniform and began her shift. The Burger King operated 24/7, but there was no security presence. Around 1 a.m., a man dressed entirely in black, wearing a ski mask and holding a gun, walked into the restaurant. At that moment, there was no one on site who could protect the staff or customers. A customer sitting at a table became his first victim. He was struck on the head with the butt of the gun. The attacker then turned to the 59-year-old manager and violently punched her in the face before heading toward the front counter. Standing behind Crystal, he aimed the gun at her, demanded that she open the cash register and hand over all the money. Crystal obeyed immediately. She opened the drawer, took out the cash, and handed it to him. But there was only $100 inside. In a fit of rage, the man pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Crystal squarely in the chest. Once the gunman fled, the injured manager called 911. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, and Crystal was rushed to the hospital. Despite doctors' efforts, she could not be saved. Officers secured the crime scene, but the attacker had already disappeared. The customer who had been struck and the manager who was assaulted told investigators everything they could recall. Both stated clearly that Crystal had not resisted. She followed every command. Yet he shot her anyway. The New York Police Department released an image of the suspect. Though the mask hid his face, they hoped someone might recognize his clothing or build. A $1,000 reward was announced for information leading to his arrest, and within days, it increased to $20,000. The loss shattered Crystal's family. Her life was only just beginning, and now her loved ones were planning her funeral. A memorial quickly formed outside the Burger King, where neighbors and strangers lit candles and placed flowers. Hundreds contributed to an online fundraiser to support the family. Christy decided to bury her daughter in Puerto Rico, their homeland. The fundraiser surpassed its goal, and JetBlue Airways provided free flights for the family. Meanwhile, police continued working around the clock. Flyers featuring the suspect were posted across the city and widely circulated online. Local news outlets covered the case heavily. Soon, there was hardly anyone in New York who hadn't heard the heartbreaking story of Crystal's death. 5 days after the shooting, police announced an arrest. Investigators had pieced together the suspect's movements through surveillance footage from multiple locations. On Friday, January 14, 2022, officers arrested Winston Glynn, 30, at a residence in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. In nearby dumpsters, they recovered several items he had used the night of the robbery. Detectives also located the cell phone he had stolen from the restaurant manager and thrown into a subway tunnel. Additional CCTV footage showed Glynn making an electronic purchase at a convenience store just an hour before the attack. Glynn, a Jamaican national living in a homeless shelter, was charged with first-degree murder, first-degree robbery, and several other offenses. Authorities confirmed that he had previously worked at the same Burger King in 2020, giving him detailed knowledge of the store's layout. The day before the killing, Glynn had entered the restaurant pretending to be a regular customer, an act investigators believe was part of his preparation. They concluded he had targeted the location because he knew it lacked security and had easy access points. Glynn did not know Crystal personally. He had quit long before she was hired. When police escorted Glynn out of the shelter in handcuffs and leg irons, he shouted angrily at a crowd of onlookers. People gathered outside the precinct jeered at him as officers led him to the car. During his court appearance, Glynn repeatedly accused the judge of lying. He was denied bail. At a later hearing, Glynn compared himself to Nelson Mandela and Jesus Christ. He also criticized how long it took witnesses to identify him, insisting the justice system mistreated people from the lower class like him. Glynn made bizarre comments about the Freemasons and the Illuminati, claiming powerful families profited from chaos in the city. His criminal record included at least 4 prior arrests, among them threatening someone with a weapon in November 2021 and illegal firearm possession in December 2020. Glynn pleaded not guilty to Crystal Bayron Neves's murder. If convicted of first-degree murder, he faces life imprisonment without parole. Court proceedings continued for months, drawing significant public attention. Despite Glynn's erratic courtroom behavior and repeated proclamations of innocence, the evidence, surveillance footage, witness accounts, and physical findings consistently pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. The community followed the case closely, hoping for justice for Crystal and her family. For her loved ones, the loss remained unbearable. But the arrest and prosecution of Winston Glynn marked a critical step toward closure. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Catherine Edwards. Before the advent of modern DNA research techniques, building a criminal database was challenging, making the investigation and tracing of crimes less effective. However, recent technological advances have led to the development of sophisticated tools that can help identify criminals who have been on the run for years. Now, no one can evade justice. On January 14, 1995, the Edwards family had a planned gathering. Saturday dinners together were a cherished tradition for the parents and their 2 daughters. So, when one of the twin sisters, Mary, was missing, it raised immediate concerns. Mary Catherine, 31, did not attend the dinner and did not answer calls from her family members, who were trying to reach her from the restaurant. Frustrated, they decided to go to Mary's home in Beaumont, Texas, where she was living at the time. When Mary's mother arrived at the house, she became worried upon finding the door unlocked. Inside, they heard running water but received no response to their calls. The bathroom was flooded, and Mary was discovered unresponsive in distressing conditions. Her sister Allison immediately called the police to report that she had found Mary's lifeless body. The sisters were twins, raised in Texas, and were the only children in the Edwards family. The loss of one was a devastating shock. They had always been inseparable, kind-hearted, and dedicated to helping others, especially children. After graduating high school, both sisters pursued careers as teachers and worked at the same school. They were so similar that students and faculty often confused them. At the time of her death, Mary was 31 years old and thriving in her career. Known for her bright personality, Her murder sparked widespread outrage and anger. Mary was cherished by her students, many of whom felt a close bond with her. Hundreds of children, relatives, and friends attended her funeral, with many students mourning the loss of a woman who had been a vital source of support in their challenging lives. Some were in tears upon hearing the news of her passing. Parents urged detectives to take action against the criminal responsible for the brutal death of Mary. The community was horrified by the circumstances surrounding her death. Mary was found handcuffed in the bathroom, indicating that she had been abused. The bathtub was filled with blood, showing that she had fought back against her attacker, as evidenced by defensive wounds on her hands and body. Traces of the assault suggested that it occurred in her bedroom, where evidence was found on the bedding. Investigators suspected that Mary might have known her attacker, as there were no signs of forced entry into her home. The townspeople, who knew Mary well, cooperated with detectives, eager to identify the person responsible for such a horrific crime. Given the brutality and circumstances, detectives focused their investigation on her close acquaintances, believing there could be a personal motive. It was initially thought that Mary might have drowned, but an autopsy revealed that her lungs did not contain enough water, suggesting that water only entered her lungs after she had died. The true cause of death was asphyxiation, as indicated by distinct marks on her neck, and injuries suggesting she had been tightly restrained with great force until she could no longer resist. Forensic experts meticulously reconstructed the crime scene by examining the victim's house, starting with the bathroom and then moving to the bedroom. They collected a significant amount of evidence. The most alarming item found was the Smith & Wesson handcuffs that the victim had been restrained with, which resembled those used by police. This discovery left law enforcement officials confused, raising suspicions about whether someone connected to the police or a security worker might have had a personal relationship with the victim. The emotional impact of the case was deeply felt by everyone involved. In the weeks following the crime, detectives attempted to trace the serial number of the handcuffs, but their efforts were unsuccessful. By this time, the primary suspect had shifted to David Perry, the ex-boyfriend of Mary. Even though Mary was attractive and sociable, she maintained a small circle of close friends and had a few ex-lovers. She dedicated most of her time to her work and her students, leaving little room for a personal life. It was discovered that David Perry was the only person who might have had keys to her house. This raised concerns that he could have been stalking her and visiting her home out of jealousy or revenge. David agreed to cooperate with the police and provide everything needed for the examination. While waiting for the results, detectives interviewed mutual acquaintances of the couple, and everyone described David as a completely harmless person, showing no signs of aggression. He had no prior criminal record, history of violent or abuse offenses. Additionally, David Perry presented solid evidence of his alibi. He was not even in town on the night of the murder, as confirmed by multiple witnesses. David fully cooperated with the investigation, voluntarily provided DNA samples, and did not exhibit any characteristics of a criminal. Forensic analysis confirmed that the DNA did not match, leading to his removal from the list of suspects. Unfortunately, that was where the investigation stalled. Others in the victim's close circle also did not fit the criminal profile and had solid alibis. Although investigators had a lot of materials for analysis, the forensic technology at the time was insufficient to make further progress. The unsuccessful search continued for years. The situation changed significantly 23 years later, in 2018, with the introduction of a DNA analysis method that utilized genealogy. This method allowed investigators to find potential matches by examining relatives of the suspected. Law enforcement turned to the GEDmatch program, which collects DNA from Americans who voluntarily submit their samples, creating a large database. This database was instrumental in solving long-standing unsolved cases. When Detective Brandon Bess was advised to revisit the old cases, he immediately recalled the unsolved murder of Mary Edwards, which had troubled him for years. In April 2020, DNA samples from the scene related to Mary were sent to a lab at Othram for analysis. Here, many matches were found with the relatives of the killer. This marked the beginning of building a family tree related to the suspect. The number of names that needed analysis was overwhelming, totaling several thousand individuals. At this point, the detective's wife, who had a keen interest in genealogy, decided to assist with the investigation. She dedicated her free time to carefully examining matches from this extensive list. This task required precision, as each name needed to be evaluated accurately to ensure their efforts were worthwhile. Additionally, the investigators reviewed the diaries of Mary. It was believed that the victim may have had an obsessive admirer who harmed her out of unrequited love. Despite a thorough examination of the diary entries following the crime, no significant leads were uncovered. They then chose to cross-reference the names mentioned in the diaries with those in the genealogical records. During this process, the surname Lapointe began to come to light. The first identified relative of the murderer was Shara Lapointe. When contacted, Shara revealed that she is a well-known expert in genealogy and genetics. With decades of experience in her field, Shara had previously worked on challenging cases. Notably, she successfully identified one of the women buried along a state highway in the infamous Texas Fields of Death. Now, she was eager to apply her expertise to help solve other crimes, including the mystery surrounding Mary Edwards's death. She was prepared to assist with the investigation, even though it meant examining her own family members, which could lead to unsettling discoveries. As she began her analysis, she felt a sense of dread while checking the backgrounds of her own siblings, aware that the results might have serious implications. She needed to review about 7,500 names. Each individual on this list was examined slowly, requiring her to gather and process information about them and their relatives before either adding them to the family tree or discarding them. This process took several hours for each person. Over 3 months, detectives and Shara Lapointe devoted all their free time to searching for the criminal. Eventually, they found a promising lead, a couple living in Beaumont who matched the profile of the murderer's family. They have 2 sons who attended Forest Park High School, the same school Mary attended as a child. This led to 2 main suspects, Michael Foreman and Clayton Foreman. Michael did not match the age profile for the time of the crime. After checking, he was found to have no criminal record or history of aggressive behavior, so he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Clayton's situation was different. He had known Mary Edwards from high school and was closer in age to her. Furthermore, he had a criminal record for abuse, making him a strong suspect. In 1981, a 19-year-old girl reported to the police that Clayton Foreman had tied her hands and abused her. The details of that crime were strikingly similar to the incident involving Mary that occurred nearly 15 years later, with the key difference being that the first victim survived. She had also attended Forest Park High School, while Clayton was a manager at that time. The incident was effectively concealed, leading to Clayton receiving a suspended sentence and a fine. At that time, there were no police databases containing DNA samples, and he was not required to provide any. This lack of evidence is why Clayton was not identified during the investigation into the death of Diana Coe, his girlfriend of 3 years, with whom he had been planning to marry. Although Diana described him as a nice guy, it seems she did not truly know him. Less than 3 months before their wedding, she discovered the details of his abuse charge, the suspended sentence, and the fine, prompting her to want to end their engagement. However, Clayton, a manipulative liar, convinced her that it was all a misunderstanding. He avoided discussing the issue but created a believable narrative. Diana, eager to believe him, prioritized her relationship over her safety, which turned out to be a mistake. They went ahead with the marriage despite warnings from her family. When Diana and Clayton were married for just over 11 years, Diana claimed that Clayton frequently lied about his significant financial issues. She also observed that he had an unusual obsession with police handcuffs and law enforcement tools, even hanging a pair of handcuffs from the rearview mirror of his car. By the time Mary was killed, Diana had already divorced Clayton. She recalled calling him in tears to share the news, but she was taken aback by his indifferent response. He continued the conversation as if nothing had happened and then hung up. It became evident that he was likely not overly concerned about the situation. He was probably connected to the events that had transpired. The suspect was now 60 years old and no longer lived in Beaumont. He had been located in a small town called Reynoldsburg, Ohio, which had a population of a few thousand. At that time, Clayton was working as a driver. Investigators were able to find his address and all necessary information. Now they needed to collect his DNA for analysis. They set up surveillance on the suspect's house. A local police officer even took his trash, which was sent to a forensic lab. DNA from Clayton was discovered on a beer bottle found in the garbage. The match was nearly 100%. A significant finding indicated that the investigation was nearly complete after all these years. The next step was to confront the suspect. The detectives in charge of the case traveled to Ohio and devised a plan to lure Clayton into a trap. Since he was a driver, they decided to approach him about a fictitious lost item that a client was supposedly searching for. On April 29, 2021, Clayton was summoned to the police precinct under the pretense of discussing a lost wallet. He agreed to come in voluntarily. For the first time in 26 years since a brutal murder, the suspected perpetrator was in the interrogation room. The detectives informed him about the murder of Mary Edwards. This news shocked him, but Clayton attempted to maintain his composure and initially denied knowing her. The detectives then showed him a wedding photo of his first wife, which included Mary and her twin sister as bridesmaids. This reminded him that Mary had indeed attended his wedding, as his wife had invited her. From the beginning, Clayton became visibly nervous as the detectives bombarded him with questions, revealing inconsistencies in his story. The detectives focused on his vulnerabilities, hoping to obtain a confession. Clayton insisted that he was unaware of Mary's death and claimed he had never been to her house. However, these statements were quickly refuted by his ex-wife. Despite the evidence, Clayton continued to deny any connection to Mary, which seemed to be a defensive reaction. He also denied having had intimate relations with her, but this was proven false when DNA samples matching his were found on her body. The realization that his DNA was discovered on her underwear and body left him bewildered. When he was arrested for the murder of Mary Edwards, he insisted on having a lawyer and stopped cooperating with the investigators. In a symbolic gesture of victory in this long-standing case, Clayton Foreman was handcuffed with the same type of cuffs that had been found on Mary. On March 12, 2024, over 29 years after the murder of Mary, Beaumont prosecutor Patrick Knauth and colleagues Mike Laird, Sonny Eckhart are ready to go to trial. The absence of a lawyer limited his options. Weak attempts to invoke the statute of limitations were unsuccessful. Clayton Foreman remained obstinately silent, neither confessing to the murder nor defending himself in court. For everyone involved in the investigation, emotions ran high. Shara LaPointe worried that the Clayton's family would resent her for participating in Clayton's arrest. Nevertheless, she received support, with others expressing concern for her safety leading up to the court hearings. Shara felt it was her duty to uncover the truth behind the cold-blooded murder, regardless of the personal costs. One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was the twin sister of Mary, Allison, who emotionally recounted how Clayton took away the person she loved most. Even after many years, she still bore a striking resemblance to her sister. During the trial, the prosecution brought in experts in genealogy and genetics, along with forensic laboratory specialists, to explain advanced DNA analysis techniques to the jurors. It was crucial to demonstrate that relative matching methods were reliable. The prosecution also focused on women who had been impacted by Clayton's actions. One of his former colleagues testified, sharing her observations of Clayton's unusual interest in police items at work. As his subordinate who handled documents, she often opened his desk drawer and found a pair of handcuffs. Although she found this odd, she didn't feel comfortable asking him about it, thinking it was just one of his quirks. The defendant's last wife shared how she discovered many dress-revealingly photos of underage girls. When she confronted Clayton about them, he responded calmly, saying he needed them to fantasize about taking away their innocence. He then laughed, dismissing it as a failed joke. Despite these disturbing revelations, Clayton continued to evade justice. One of his victims, Diana Coe, also attended the trial. She believed in his guilt and testified for the prosecution. It was during this time that she learned about another victim and realized the full extent of her ex-husband's cruelty. However, she pointed out that during their 11 years of marriage, he did not display such behaviors during their intimate moments and never crossed reasonable boundaries in their relationship. The first victim of Clayton's assault provided a detailed testimony about her experience. At the time, she was 19 years old and just months away from his wedding to Diana. One night, while driving home along a dirt road, her car got stuck. Suddenly, a civilian car pulled up, and a man claiming to be a police officer got out to offer her help. Feeling helpless, she accepted his assistance. However, as she stepped out of her car, he attacked her, tied her hands behind her back, and threatened her with a knife, saying he would slit her throat if she resisted. Clayton abused her. Surprisingly, afterward, he became more gentle, even driving her home. During the ride, he asked her not to cry, tried to comfort her, and expressed remorse for what had happened, claiming he didn't want to hurt her. This sudden shift in his demeanor was unsettling, especially considering the violent behavior he had just exhibited. At that time, she reported the incident to the police, but she was fearful. In court, she mentioned that she had forgiven her attacker and harbored no resentment towards him. She did not wish to harm Clayton. She believed he truly regretted his actions and would not reoffend. This perspective contributed to the light punishment he received. Now the first victim feels guilty, thinking that if Clayton had been imprisoned, it might have prevented the murder of Mary. Additionally, another victim testified against the defendant in court. Previously, she had been too afraid to contact law enforcement. This woman was also a friend of Diana, with whom she had stayed in touch during school. According to her testimony, Clayton attacked her one evening in 2006 while she was living alone in her apartment. Their past friendship allowed her to communicate with him, and he initially appeared to be an ordinary guy until his darker side emerged. One evening, Clayton visited her apartment and revealed that he was struggling financially and having marital issues. He was convincing, expressing a need for someone to understand and listen to him without judgment. Feeling sympathetic, she let him in. However, once she turned her back, he attacked her, held a gun to her head, threatened her, and assaulted her. He also used handcuffs during the attack. After it was over, Clayton surprisingly softened, apologized, and asked her not to report the incident to the police. She was scared, so she did not file charges against him. Following that night, Clayton did not reach out to her at all. It's important to note that his assaults were strikingly similar to a situation that could have occurred with Mary Edwards. Unlike previous victims, however, Mary fought back against his attack. The prosecution's witnesses testified for 7 days, while the defense presented no evidence. The defense attorney claimed that although Clayton might be an abuser, there was no proof that he was also a murderer. The defense suggested that Clayton's limited options might have influenced the situation. They acknowledged incidents involving other women, stating that Clayton typically did not act aggressively towards his wives, except for his fetish involving handcuffs. After hearing the prosecution's arguments, the jurors went to deliberate. They found Clayton Foreman guilty of murdering Mary Catherine Edwards. He received a life sentence. Clayton is eligible for parole in 2061. By then, he will be 101 years old. The The jurors stated that it was not merely the testimonies from the traumatized women that led to their decision. Rather, it was the forensic experts' analysis of DNA evidence showing a nearly 100% match with Clayton Foreman's DNA that confirmed their conviction. The experts provided such a thorough explanation of the principles of modern forensic methodologies that it was difficult to find more convincing words. The convict also refused to admit his guilt until the end, even in the face of evidence regarding the abuse. Naturally, against this background, he never revealed the details of his heinous crime. Nevertheless, there remained even more horrifying questions. For many years, Clayton managed to skillfully hide his malicious nature from everyone around him, even from the women he lived closely with. Most people around him had no idea that he was capable of murder. Authorities suspected that he might have been involved in a significantly larger number of bloody crimes that remained unsolved. Clayton Foreman is in state prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2061, of course, if he lives that long. He continues to keep silent, while authorities do not lose hope that he will eventually reveal his secrets.